I'd like to start by asking a very simple question. Who are we really? We all have a self-image, but is that our truest reflection? What about the versions of ourselves we let out into the world, either by hiding parts of who we think we are or overemphasizing other points? Could these potentially be closer to our truest self than the self-image? The same set of questions can be asked of those around us. Family, friends, co-workers, random people at the grocery store, and more. Despite how lost in the myriad we may become, though, we must never forget that life has a meaning and that the meaning differs between person to person. Never give up, never lose hope, never be afraid to show who you really are. These are the themes embedded within our discussion of today. Persona 1, a trailblazer for a now much beloved series that's collecting more and more dust by the minute. Take a seat, grab a drink, and get cozy. We're about to dive into this game's engine to try to demystify Persona 1 as much as we can to make such an old title more accessible for everyone. I present to you Persona 1, a dive within oneself. Please enjoy. First things first, what exactly is Persona, both as a concept and as a video game? To start, we have to look one step above Persona in the family tree at Shin Megami Tensei. When Persona dropped onto the scene, Shin Megami Tensei had a few titles out already, but there was one little formative title that eventually led Atlus to the development of Persona 1. Shin Megami Tensei If, released in October 1994 for the SNES. The third proper game of the Shin Megami Tensei series, If is sort of like a Fire Emblem Gaiden or Zelda 2 situation. Similar to what came before, but one tweak makes things completely different. Unlike those two though, If's main differentiating component is its setting, high school. Prior to 1994, a lot of the RPGs on the market were more fantasy-based. Of course you have your obvious standouts in Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy, but you also have the likes of Paladin's Quest and Soul Blazer out there as well. All solid RPGs in their own right, but also placed in fantasy settings far removed from our own reality in the current day. That's where Shin Megami Tensei If comes in, keeping most of the elements of the first two titles but dropping you into a high school setting. And also the apocalypse not happening, that may have helped a little bit. In that regard, it's actually not that dissimilar to the Mother series. But whereas the Mother series is set in a retro-American inspired rural town setting, Shin Megami Tensei If is set in a Japanese high school. As you might have guessed if you've seen literally any anime in the last 20 years, in the Japanese markets the high school setting proved to be a pretty popular one, as the game went on to sell nearly 130,000 units on the SNES. Pretty respectable numbers for a third title dubbed as a spin-off nearly 4 years into the system's lifespan. Gotta say. Another element that transferred into the Persona series was the Guardian system. If you haven't played Shin Megami Tensei If, like me, oops. The best way I can describe the Guardian system is imagine you're a regular party member in the modern Persona games. Just one persona that'll give you spells and skills as it grows. Unlike the party personas though, where they have some significance to the character, the Guardians just act more like the randomized boons that you would get in a roguelike, just not nearly as customizable. Mix that with how you get a new Guardian each time you're knocked out though, and what you get is a highly replayable experience full of experimentation. That spirit of experimentation carried on into Shin Megami Tensei If's spiritual successor, Persona 1. Development info on the Japanese PS1 version of Persona 1 is pretty scarce, but what it can at least offer in the meantime is a sense of familiarity. Production began shortly after the release of Shin Megami Tensei If in 1994, and was headed up by one Koji Okada. One of the founding members of Atlus, Okada's credentials at the time of Persona 1's development consisted largely of directorial positions for the Shin Megami Tensei franchise, save for Shin Megami Tensei 1 where Okada served as programmer. Alongside him for the ride were Kazuma Kaneko, responsible for all the character art and persona art will be seen throughout this video, Hidetoshi Takagi as the main programmer, Takayuki Ide as the main designer, and Hidehito Aoki as the main sound designer among many other talents early in Atlus's lifespan. As for how smoothly development went, I searched up and down, scrolling through old interviews and the like, and the most that I could really find is that the ending movie had to be cut down to just still images. We'll go more into this later though, as y'all will need a good understanding of who this is before I get into all that. For now, just know that Persona 1 was released to Japan in September 1996, going on to sell a little over 409,000 units, and holding a series record in Japan all the way until Persona 5 in 2016. Once it finally decided to come out anyway, but that's a whole other can of worms for another day, you know what I mean? There was a localized version that came out in the US just 3 months later, which for the standards of the 90s and the fact that Atlus USA was still very small at the time is scarily impressive. Too impressive. The main theory behind the quick turnaround is that the team wanted the game out in time for Christmas, but that's speculation. I'd rather not speak on things I don't have knowledge on. This version was titled Revelations Persona, and came rife with its own set of issues, but we'll be covering that in a later section of this video. For now, I've tossed the word persona out plenty by this point. It's time to dive into the psyche and draw out exactly what that word really means. Let me introduce you to Mr. Carl Jung, a psychiatrist, psychologist, and psychotherapist of the early 1900s. While a partner turned rival to Sigmund Freud, the main thing we want to take away from Carl Jung is his work on examining the self. We're just going to go over a couple of the concepts here that relate to the game's themes and gameplay on a surface level. The idea of this video is to give an easy to understand crash course about an old title, not take anyone through Psych 101. Not only was psychology not my major in college, but I dropped out after a year and a half. Will that stop me from talking about the psychological elements of this game though? Nope, absolutely not. Now, first and foremost, the persona. When I speak of a persona, I speak of a metaphorical mask one puts on for the world. A mask that can be changed out, flipped around, or discarded depending on the situation we find ourselves in and the people that we find in our company. Speaking for myself, online I feel like I let off the impression that I'm confident and headstrong, willing to fight for what's right in an instant, but sometimes in such a way to where it lands me in trouble. In real life though, I'm much more on the quiet side, as I find it much harder to form my thoughts right there in the moment. Both sides of a coin I can give off an air of kindness, but there is plenty of times where I can get nasty too, I'll admit that. Generally with bigots, people who lack self-respect for others, people who can't help but get in their own way while making the social environment shitty for everyone, the people worthy of scorn, you know? Enough about me though, back into the concepts. Next up, the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we want to hide away from the world at all costs. These usually come in the form of very uncomfortable truths about our beliefs, or dark thoughts wanting to see the light of day regardless of consequences. Sidestepping into Freud for a quick moment, Freud had a similar model with the ego, id, and superego. In that model's case, the id works much the same as the shadow, hiding our deepest impulses. The superego swings the exact opposite way, wanting us to act as perfectly as possible in accordance to society, despite any possible consequences. In the middle of those two is the ego, acting as a balancing act between the impulses of the other two in order to draw out the most natural responses in accordance to oneself. There is no incorrect model to use for Persona the game series, and in fact, you might find use examining situations using both models side by side. Back in the Jungian concepts, we have the self, which is tied heavily to individuation. The self is the truest parts of a person, both positive and negative, to put it as simply as possible. We'll often spend our entire lives trying to figure out exactly who we are, what our true values are, and everything along those lines. That whole experience ties back to the self. Lastly, for relevant concepts, the archetype. We're all human here, I think. So you're all aware of these through the performances we see in any piece of fiction, be it television, movies, or gaming. You have played a video game before, right? If not, you good? How'd you get here? Do you need any help? Anyway, those different roles that everyone performs goes back to the archetype. The loving mother, the wise town elder, the child, the stern father, the trickster. All archetypes that we see time and time again. In Persona, the way these archetypes come out is in conjunction with the Fool's Journey, a story told over the course of 22 major arcana cards as the Fool goes through life in search of a self. These arcana are used for the cast, letting us know just exactly where they are in life and letting us understand them on a deeper level, as well as the personas for a small dive into their characteristics. We'll get into analyzing our lovely cast later, but for now I think we're finally ready to explore the story of Persona 1. A story really revolving around one character, but with many different aspects of that one character. For those that haven't played Persona 1, the best comparison point I have for you is Persona 5 Royal's third semester story. Not quite the same, but a similar sort of feel. If you'd like to avoid spoilers, please jump ahead to this timestamp here. Everything after that point will contain as few spoilers as humanly possible. Now then, let's dust off the storybook and enjoy the tale of where the series first began. Or at least, the main plotline anyway. I should note that for this section, while I will be using footage from the localized Persona 1, I will be calling all characters by their Japanese names. I'll also be taking cues from that script as opposed to the localized script, and I'm going to try to make this as succinct as possible while hitting every key point. With that said, though, within the walls of St. Hermelin High School in Mikagecho, our game opens up on a group of kids talking in an empty classroom with the desks pushed off to the side after hours, as is typical for the 1990s, clearly. The very first piece of dialogue in the localization asks another character if they're stupid for wanting to play Persona, truly an opening for the ages. Here, we meet a good majority of our cast, the protagonist of the Emperor Arcana, Naoya Turu, or the Boy with Earring, Masao Iniba, aka Mark, of the Chariot Arcana, Kei Najo of the Hierophant Arcana, Hidehiku Uesugi, aka Brown, of the Justice Arcana, Eriko Kirishima, aka Ellie, of the Judgment Arcana, Yuka Ayase, of the Magician Arcana, and Yukino Mayazumi, of the Empress Arcana. There's a couple more goobers later on, but for now, this is pretty much everyone. After a brief discussion, the kids play what's called the Persona game, which basically involves them going around the room in a square formation calling out to their persona in an effort to see into their future. Of course, nothing happens, why would it? Or so you would think. After a few moments pass, a small ghostly girl in white and wearing a red ribbon apparates, calling out for help. Before the kids can properly react, the power in the room begins to surge, knocking a few people unconscious, including Naoya. This leads those knocked out into a space between dream and reality, mind and matter, called the collective unconscious. Naoya is greeted by a character known as Philemon, who possibly has the hardest test of all time. No, not the SATs, or having to break news to someone grieving that even worse things occurred, or being a Persona fan in 2013. The hardest test of all? Being able to state your name. Crazy, I know! In this economy and everything too, come on now, Philemon, I got mouths to feed, I can't have you asking for my name. Anyway, once Naya is able to clear that grueling task, Philemon feels they have such a strong grasp on their own identity as a 7-year-old high school student that he grants Naya the power of Persona. Naoya ends up receiving the Japanese Buddhist protector deity Seimen Kongu, who only appears in this game. With one ominous warning that this power is needed soon, our protagonist wakes up in the school's infirmary. The cast's lovely teacher, but popular Miss Seiko, asks the group you see on screen here to go to the hospital after the events from earlier, just to make sure everything's a-okay. In that same hospital is a classmate of the group's, Maki Sanamura. Mark's been visiting her a few times, but after the earlier power issues, they decide to go pay her a visit while getting their checkups, just to make sure that she's fine as well. While for the most part Maki's alright, she clearly has some stuff on her mind between lovely dreams of an almost fatherly figure, issues with the hospital staff, and feeling abandoned by her mother. After mentioning that last part, Maki quickly goes into an episode. The gang leaves to get a doctor only for an earthquake to strike as they do so. The path to the ICU is no more. Left confused and worried for Maki, the gang is quickly having to worry about themselves as screaming is heard throughout the entire hospital. Moving toward the screams, they discover zombies. Yes, zombies are now here and on the prowl, attacking everyone in sight. Or at least Najo's butler anyway. Poor guy. Ending up in a conflict with these zombies, the kids all awaken to their personas, conveniently knocking out one zombie each. We already discussed Naoya's, but in order of awakening, Najo has one of the wisdom keys of Vajrayana Buddhism, Aizen Myou. Mark has Ogun, a Yoruba spirit most associated with introducing mankind to the uses of iron, and Yukino has Vesta, which is more of a living flame than anything in Roman mythology, but was said to have blessed the domestic affairs of the citizens. Get attached to only 2 of these characters for the main route, but not the 3rd. Take a wild guess as to who. It's more obvious than you think. While the kids were able to successfully protect themselves, the same could not be said for Nanjo's butler, Yamaoka, who not too long ago in the story was used as a quick joke to show that Nanjo was still pretty pampered. After promising to be in Nanjo's heart, the butler passes, and while the moment is sad, not too much time can be spent here. After a quick discussion of figuring out what the heck came out of him, that being the personas, the group of 4 ventures toward the exit, now much more of a labyrinth than when they first came in. As this is the story discussion, we'll be saving gameplay mechanics until later. So for now, let's skip ahead to the hospital's entrance. Despite the zombies and their ilk being right behind the kids, the player is given a choice to save a nurse who's been trapped under a vending machine. This will be important later. While trying to rescue the nurse, a couple zombies appear, but most notably, Ellie, who we haven't seen since the scene in the classroom. A lover of the occult, Ellie is awoken to her own persona, Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. Girl's plenty capable of handling herself, as odd as she can be at times. Ellie lets the group know that the school's pretty much the only safe place in town. But before then, the group should make their way over to the shrine. You know, the things that America is definitely known for. Thanks, localized Persona 1. Apparently Maki's mother, who works for SEBEC, is collapsed in there after a confrontation, so we need to go help her out. Upon arriving, instead of talking to Maki's mom, the group is pulled into the collective unconscious by Philemon once again, now taking on a golden butterfly form. Philemon's here to basically act as a glowing, giant arrow in the right direction, much like the arrows pointing out the correct direction in Mario Kart. This time, not nearly as direct, just letting everyone know that there's some evil people behind the scenes that they must stop, and that there's a couple different paths we, the player, can go down. Technically true, but also incredibly false if you're playing the localized PS1 version. The mystery of who this evil person could be comes apart almost immediately, as Maki's mom lets the party know that Kandori's goons were the ones that shot her. Who's Kandori? A branch president of SEBEC, of course. More importantly, Maki's mother informs everyone about the Deva system, a machine that she worked on that was engineered to affect reality itself. I feel like at some point, someone should have probably said, "Nah, I'm good," and sabotage from within, knowing the possible ramifications of such a goal, but nope. And that's how you get zombies. Before passing out, Maki's mom is gracious enough to give the group a security card and allow them entry into the building. The group splinters off further at this point, with Mark and Nanjo taking the security card to head to SEBEC on reckless goofball behavior, while the ladies and protagonist are tasked with getting Maki's mom back to the school's infirmary. If you're like me, this is where you start using the casino and the Sun Mall with a lovely little tool to win like crazy at Codebreakers, but more importantly, this is where you get a path split. In every version outside of a PS1 localized edition anyway. Continuing with the main path, which is called the SEBEC route, SEBEC? We get yet another poor localization moment with this little poem here. It's obvious what they're going for, but also, let me just put Mark's portrait next to his dialogue box. And now let me make him bigger for dramatic effect. Y'all see the problem here, right? We'll get into why this localization is as poor as it is during the PSP version discussion section, but also this team just could not help tripping over themselves, I swear to God. Once Maki's mom is dropped off in the infirmary, pass by Ayase real quick and venture through a giant hole in the wall left by a monster attack earlier on. Once committing to this path, we get to see Maki now out of the hospital bed, fully recovered and back to being a vibrant girl in gray and wearing a red ribbon, but most weirdly, not remembering her time in the hospital at all? Sure, girl. Whatever you say. Totally not a red flag that something's up or anything. Nope. While sorting through this confusion, Nanjo comes back to the school, letting Naoya know that Mark got himself into some trouble at the police station, in the hunt for some guns before taking on SEBEC. Oddly enough, pointing the American version's favor here, the police having a bunch of guns makes complete sense. Tipping off alarm bells even more, Maki's not aware of what a police station is. Girl, how? Literally how? Explain yourself. The gym being rebuilt is another mystery for this girl. Tricky. As the group gets ready to leave, a demon swings through ready for another assault. Defending in the attack, Maki awakens to her persona named Maso, a Chinese goddess who protects seamen from the dangers of the ocean. Despite not knowing what the police are, the much more complicated matter of figuring out what the heck personas are and what they need to do comes a lot easier to Maki. Keep the oddities in the back of your mind as we progress, yeah? Next stop on the docket is the police station to save that idiot named Mark from his own demise. Once we get to the deepest part of a police station, the team find Mark locked up alongside Brown, with yet another moment of poor localization choices happening here. Again, early Atlas. How? How did that slip through the cracks? The way we wouldn't even have a Persona 2 if a script like this came out today, I'm telling you. Once Mark and Brown are freed from their prison cells, some demons disguising as police staff break through. We get another one of those, hey, here's Persona as you defend yourself moments here with Brown, who awakens to Nemheim, an Irish deity who's an aspect of a goddess Morrigan, but on her own, represents the frenzied state armies feel during war. After catching Brown up to speed, we get an aspect of these games wholly unique to Persona 1, party options. This is one of the paths Philemon may have been alluding to earlier, but in the SEBEC route, you have 3 locked party members in Maki, Mark, and Nanjo. Obviously, you can't switch out the protagonist, so that last slot ends up being taken up by either Brown, Ellie, Ayase, or the mystery character behind door number 4. Yukino gets nothing in this route, which makes her the least utilized character in Persona 1's localized version by a pretty lengthy margin. Good job, guys. Brown gives off too much beta energy, so let's get past him for now and keep on trucking. The group's next stop is the abandoned factory to utilize that security card Maki's mother gave the group a while back. Along the way, you can make a pit stop at what I personally find to be a frustrating dungeon, the subway, that is absolutely not fresh, to recruit Ellie, but I don't think this group is a good fit for her personality, so let's skip past her and get to the abandoned factory. We get a good look at Mark's graffiti work, which is honestly pretty nice. I can't draw for crap, so good for him. Before getting ambushed by Ayase, who also very much wants to be part of a team. Ayase doesn't take the rejection well though, wishing her friends death. Charming. Nevertheless, we persist. After finding where to use the security card, the team's next task is making their way through an underground passage and into the SEBEC building. Simple enough goal, trying to find Kandori to make him pay for what he did to Maki's mother in the Tanamikake show. It takes some fumbling around with some guys in suits and winged beasts, but the team ends up making it to Kandori pretty easily. Not the best in-house security, gotta say, especially with various staff members seeing you kids walk in. Jessica at the front desk needs to get her paycheck to feed her family, and your infiltration is security's problem, not Jessica's, so why say anything? Good for you, Jessica. Anyway, once the kids get to Kandori's door, they can hear him discussing the Deva system and how it just needs some minor adjustments. Obviously, we don't want that, but shortly after busting into the room, Kandori scurries away like the little rat he is, leaving his underling Takeda to deal with these meddling kids. A bit of a rougher fight thanks to the power of numbers, but one that's won all the same. Next step is finding where Kandori fled to during that fight, but fortunately, the man takes his clues from Scooby-Doo with the old hidden passageway technique. Along the way, you can find some scientists worrying about both the results of the project as well as the well-being of the head researcher, Dr. Nikolai. Turns out, both Nikolai and Kandori are right next to the Deva system, with Nikolai trying his hardest to make Kandori not fire off the machine again. Both in this conversation and the one before the Takeda fight, there's mention of a boy who apparently got him away. Not many people can just walk into SEBEC though. This will be important later. Stepping into the role of martyr, Dr. Nikolai takes Kandori inside the machine as it fires up, trying to take him down in the most effective way possible. Outside the machine lies a 2-button panel, as is natural for a research facility in any type of machine, really. One of these buttons will stop the machine and the other will make it go faster. According to Maki, how the hell she knew this info? We'll never know. While the results are the same, it's a morality choice, as Nikolai and Kandori shout for different results from the inside. This choice will also be important later. Again, no matter what you choose though, the results are the same, so try to be the most conscientious of the human element here. While Kandori revels in rematerializing, a small girl in black and wearing a red ribbon suddenly appears, as children are known to do. This little girl calls Kandori her father, and abides by his wish to take him to her world. The little girl then pulls out a compact, then, all of a sudden, poof, the team gets whisked through both time and space to an old gymnasium, the same one Maki was familiar with when we were talking to her right before she gained Maso. A familiar world, but most certainly not the same one. As we the player explore this version of St. Hermlin, Naoya and crew run into who I'm going to affectionately refer to as Old Yosuke, just to avoid confusion with Yosuke, and by extension, Yusuke. Old Yosuke is able to confirm a couple things for Naoya and friends straight away, that this is indeed a parallel world, and that Maki comes from this world, not the original world of the cast. A world that was specifically a paradise for Maki, per the localization script. After just a bit more small talk, including wondering where old Yosuke's girlfriend, while be calling old Chisato as to not confuse Nanako, went, this world's school begins to shake with the small girl in the black dress intent on destroying it. Girl, I get it. Physics ain't the most fun class and these uniforms are ugly, but can you not? Please? The AP Japanese history teacher's been through enough already. God damn. With the school now becoming its own labyrinth, with perhaps my favorite assortment of demons such as dribblers, kobolds, and of course an army of Hanakos, it's quite the arduous task, but the team ends up making it to the courtyard in one piece. Along the way though, we finally find the mystery character behind door number 4. This would be none other than Reiji Kido, a strong and serious individual wielding the persona Bray, a Keenan Irish mythos often described as beautiful but with many flaws, namely in the treatment of others. Anyway, back to the courtyard. There's a big robot rat. The little girl in black, who we now know as Aki, wants to destroy the party at this point, including the school, but does not hesitate to call Maki, the high school student, flat. Girl, you're like 6, go color a book or something, this is not your moment. With the party successfully provoked, the small gremlin brings in her robotic rat with a massive gun on its back and, more impressively, the most unhinged battle theme for a boss I've ever heard. Let me give y'all just a few seconds. I don't know what was cooking, but holy shit, keep them in the kitchen. This is a fun track. Keep the plot moving along, old Yosuke brings the team to a student named Tsutomu, basically reiterating to everyone that they really need to kill this Kandori guy. Also, apparently Tsutomu met Philemon? Butterfly Man must be treating this event like an album rollout because there sure are a lot of meet and greets going on at the moment. The conversation basically just ends in saying, hey, go to Philemon, making Tsutomu the glowing signpost pointing to Philemon's glowing signpost. Whatever gets the kids out of school though, I guess. Once the kids finally get back to the shrine, Philemon once again reiterates that this Kandori guy really needs to go, but on top of that, gives the player a set of instructions. Find a special mirror and then go through the subway system, to stop Kandori from creating the Japanese equivalent of East Coast versus West Coast. The mirror is pretty easy to find, being located in a museum. The little girl in white suddenly appears again after being gone for longer than Yukino, begging everyone not to take it. But they need to catch the red line somehow, so yoink! Maki seemed to recognize the little girl though, calling her Mai. Interesting. Not much really happens in the subway, admittedly. Sure, Aki trapped everyone on this side of town for meddling with her, but like, they kinda have business over here anyway? She did also tell the team that their next opponent was pretty, which I guess can help, maybe, depending on what we're defining as pretty. Fortunately, there's still a mall on this side of town, so I can play more code breakers, and... Ah, crap, I can't even leave a mall now. Well, that ain't exactly fair now, is it? How else am I supposed to get more metal cards? This entrapment is at the hands of a harem queen, who has left both the party and the current denizens of the mall with no means of escape while feeling her own desires to be called beautiful, to be valued. Fortunately for the kids though, she left the door to her dungeon wide open and within the mall instead of somewhere people who know about the issue wouldn't be able to access it.
Big mistake.
Once Naoya and crew finally reach the Queen's room, they discover it's none other than Old Chisato, who's made a deal with Aki. The short of Old Chisato's plight here is that old Yosuke was in love with Maki, and Maki held those same feelings, but Old Chisato was jealous of everything Maki had going for her and decided to take a slice of the action. In this new world, Old Chisato wanted a way to make sure she could always get her way moving forward. A way where she wouldn't have to deal with people she perceived to be a threat, hence why Aki lends her the mirror, a vanity item. The catch with this mirror though is the more she uses it, the more moles appear on her face, meaning the less conventionally beautiful she becomes, creating its own problem as Chisato has relied quite a bit on her natural beauty so far. The fact that Old Chisato also enjoys painting is not lost on me. Another medium in which to capture beauty, but alas, Maki even exceeds her in this field. This whole arc is a nice little tale about having complete control won't always guarantee you'll see the results that you want. It may even drive people away if you play your cards wrong. The way to success is by working on and improving yourself, not tearing others down. A lesson Old Chisato learns after just the protagonist and Maki take her down in a follow-up conversation with Old Yosuke. By the way, before the fight, tell Old Chisato that Maki's paintings are better. This will be important later, with Old Chisato now secure in herself and no longer pitting herself against Maki. The mirror breaks and Old Chisato's face returns to normal, as her inner beauty begins to shine out. Of course, there's a little prodding from Aki before this moment, calling this whole mess of a mall an experiment Kandori was conducting, but hey, little gremlin's gonna be a little gremlin. The only hint the crew have to go off of for now is that per Old Chisato, Aki lives in a castle, so they decide to go find that. Not super hard of a task given both its size and the surroundings, but still, just a little search. The castle is where the hospital used to be. At first an odd transformation, but something that'll make way more sense in due time. Once everyone gets to the entrance, Aki's there to taunt the party once again, letting them know that the only way in is with a specific key, a compact. But that compact is being held by someone inside a forest, someone who wouldn't dare approach the castle. If you remember, way earlier on, when we were about to leave the school, there was a comment made by Maki wearing her favorite compact and therefore was the real deal. Puzzle pieces fallen into place yet? Maki is able to put together that the forest Aki is referring to is the Lost Forest, which is on the other side of the town. Fortunately, they're able to get back over there after the events of the mall, unfortunately for the subway system, but at least they can make their way there. A cozy little dungeon. At the end of a team's walk, the kids find a small gingerbread house. Surely nothing bad will happen here, right? Well, that depends on you. Inside the house is Mai, the girl in white we've seen exactly twice now. Mai does indeed have a compact, one Maki says matches hers pretty clearly. Per Mai, Aki is a version of her that sprung to life once Kandori showed up into town. A shadow, if you will. Both sides of a compact, the one that Mai has and the one that Maki has, are able to grant pretty much any wish. But because Aki has Kandori on her side, there's not much Mai can do without Aki undoing it right away or worse. This conversation is very important, but not for the reasons I've been hinting at earlier with the vending machine in Maki's painting. We're given a set of dialogue options, which, much like Persona 4's set, can lead to a bad ending if we don't play our cards right here. In the case of Persona 1, The questions on display here are simply about not giving into fear. It's less about trying to get the others around you to question what they think they know, and more about having the conviction to keep going despite the odds. It's just a free-pronged question, but one that could result in you fighting a giant teddy bear if you mess it up, so be cool and put on your big, brave protagonist pants. Someone's got to seize the castle, and we left Roy behind 4 chapters ago. Mai does warn Nalia and company that showing up with a half compact to open the door is exactly what Kandori wants, but the group can't really do anything else. Well, maybe except using the compact to warp to a throne room, but these kids aren't exactly creative. Maybe old Chisato's paintings actually were better. Damn. Anyway, once everyone does get back to the castle after yet another adventure through my least favorite dungeon, they of course insert the half compact to open the door, which does let the squad in, but Kandori ends up taking the other half of the compact in the process. Najo does make a little remark about this being exactly what Kandori wants, but 2 things. 1, you're not the scriptwriter, bub. 2, since the compact grants wishes, say something? Being a smart aleck over nothing, I swear. Anyway, after another dungeon crawl, the team gets up to the throne room to find both Kandori and Aki. If you decided not to do the 50,000 steps to recruit Reiji, more on that later in the gameplay section, this is where you'd first see him if you didn't take any of the optional detours at the beginning of the game. Collapsed on the ground after facing off against Kandori. If you did decide to recruit Reiji though, you'll learn a very interesting truth. Reiji and Kandori are half-brothers, with Reiji's mom being so casually discarded by his father. As the father is now dead, Reiji projects all that anger onto Kandori, explaining why Reiji's feelings were so pointed earlier on. Back to the task at hand. Thanks to the team's fumbling of a bag with a half compact, Kandori now has the full compact, able to go back and forth between the 2 worlds at will and able to bend the reality of the world the party's from as he sees fit. A long way around to getting the results Kandori desired with the Deva system, but achieved all the same. Kandori leaves the kids to go back to the real world, but not before leaving them a monster complete with a Batman reference in the US localization. The game feels some hopelessness about the situation after wiping away that scrub, but they're back on the right track thanks to Maki via both a pep talk and a pointer in the right direction toward the haunted house. The rumor about the haunted house is that people disappear there, so the group is hoping the rumor is so true, it'll lead them back to their own world. Pretty reckless, but hey, not really much else they can do at this point, so why not? Going through the haunted house, we do find some scientists who work with Kandori, so we're probably moving in the right direction here, yeah? A bunch of floating paintings later, and we get confirmation on that hunch, as the group hears Maki's mother from the other side of the door. Oddly enough, though, the Maki of this world is claiming she doesn't have a mother. Upon swinging open the doors, you find a giant creature that looks ready to strike, but instead of monstrous grunting and growling, it emanates Maki's mother's voice. We, the player, can choose to either fight the monster or let it live. The choice is yours, but just know it's an important one. This time though, I'll let you all in immediately. Assuming you let the monster live, it turns out that she is Maki's mother. Most likely, her appearance was yet another trap by Kandori, a trap of a heart even if her mom didn't exist in this world. Not much time can be afforded here though, as the portal that Maki's mom apparently sleptwalked into is fading away. If I had to guess, this portal, this machinery, and Maki's mom all finding their way into this world, odds are that's probably Philemon's work, but I can't be 100% certain. Maki's mom decides to keep the portal stable using the machinery in the room so that the game can get back to their world in one piece, something this world's Maki is very thankful for. This moment also gives some solid contrast between the 2 versions of Maki, as the one we saw in the hospital bed lamented her mother for not being around as often as she would have liked. At any rate, the portal is utilized after chasing a rumor, landing everyone back in the original world right next to the Deva system. After some squabbling, Maki takes notice of Dr. Nikolai, Instead of a selfless man we saw at the beginning of the game, though, this one's nothing short of nihilistic, seeking the total annihilation of a planet. This, of course, is the work of Kandori, who has shaped the world as he sees fit. A very, very powerful man who refuses to do anything about a group of 5 high school students directly, as important men are known to do. More importantly, Kandori seems to know Maki directly. Peculiar. Exiting the room reveals that the group is directly inside the Deva Yuga, the castle that we saw Kandori construct in the mirror in the other world. Generous to give your opponents a direct shot like this, but we'll take it. A little dungeon crawly crawl later will take the group to a new throne room of sorts. And I'd be lying if I said I wasn't digging the vibe of this room. It's something about the golden divider sides, the carpet on the pitch black floor, and the cherry blossoms falling from the ceiling. Honestly, it's a nice, pretty sight. Until you notice that Aki's here once again. Girlie needs to go ASAP. Oh, wait, Kandori just... thanks, man! You'd expect Kandori to be this man bent on destruction after everything we've seen, but instead we're treated to a much more human approach. Ever since the start of the game, Kandori has gotten pretty much everything he's wanted. Full control. Similar enough to old Chisato, just on a much larger scale. However, unlike old Chisato, who has her whole life ahead of her, including a romance with old Yosuke, Kandori's achieved everything he's wanted at the ripe age of 28. He's climbed the corporate ladder and has seized the world for himself. Ordinarily, when you achieve your goals, you set yourself some new ones, or find a hobby, something along those lines. But in Kandori's case, such tasks would be nothing short of trivial. In his case, the meaning of life is always having something to strive for, and since there simply is nothing left, why try to continue? Kandori will pose the question to everyone in the party, and while this will be important later, just remember that the entire game so far has had you answering with strong conviction of the mind. Nanjo is able to prod at Kandori further here, making clear that yes, while he feels all sad and stuff, he's also hurt a lot of people. To do that and then only feel apathy now is pretty unforgivable. This is good enough to goad Kandori into action and into a proper fight with the party. While the fight goes pretty smoothly, there's one thing most certainly worth mentioning. At the halfway point, Kandori is willing to concede the showdown. As Kandori's desire for power begins to waver, however, a mysterious figure calls out to him, then takes control of Kandori's body. This figure is none other than his persona, Nyarlathotep, from the works of H.P. Lovecraft, who essentially consumes Kandori, turning him into a proper god with all the proportions. Or Super Guido, if you want to go off a localized version of the game. Once that whole business is taken care of, in his dying breaths, Kandori reveals some very significant information after some correct deduction work by Nanjo. The Maki we've been working with for the entire game, as well as the other world, which by extension includes both Mai and Aki, are all the construct of a singular person. That person? None other than the real Maki. The Maki we've been with is none other than the ideal Maki. As the ideal Maki is still a version of Maki, I'll just refer to her as Maki, but still, hearing you're not the real version of yourself would send anyone into a tailspin. Maki here is absolutely no different. Nanjo also takes a moment to deduce that outside of her world changes, old Yosuke and old Chisato were brought over because Maki felt so lonely during her time in the hospital, just wanting people that she can call friends in a world where she was happy. As far as how that world came to be, for some reason even Kandori doesn't quite understand. The energy the real Maki had for her world, the sheer disdain and desire for a new world, ended up linking up with the Deva system long before the events of the game, amplifying it to where the machine could control multiple worlds. In his final moments, Kandori gives the team one last piece of info as well as a warning. The real Maki is inside the Deva Yuga somewhere, and that Maki needs to discover herself before she ends up in the same nihilistic state that Kandori wound up in himself. The little bits and crumbs from throughout the story are starting to weave together in this final moment of Kandori's, and the turn to make Kandori at least slightly sympathetic by relating his journey to where Maki is currently at does wonders for the narrative. But alas, the team's not done yet. Next Fane's next, taking a stroll down the hall to find the real Maki. Once the game does find her, we see the real Maki connected to several pieces of medical equipment, creating a bit of a mirrored situation to the beginning of the game, connected to what I can only assume is a port of the Deva system. By her side is Aki, distraught how the team killed her quote-unquote father, but since we know that Aki's just an aspect of Maki now, it'd be more accurate to say that Maki is now lost once again with no one or nowhere to guide her emotions. Aki vanishes pretty quickly into this scene, more on that later. Wanting nothing but the end to come at this point, Maki ventures into the mirror in the hospital room, the same one Kandori used to get back to the real world. Here we see some conflict, with Mark wanting to follow Maki into the mirror to save herself from herself, while Najo's main priority is to destroy the Deva system, which in turn would kill the real Maki, but would cease any more destruction. In the end, Mark ends up winning out here, as the value of a human being is more than just being counted as a human life. Unfortunately for the party though, with Maki wanting to seal herself away, she has destroyed both the Deva system and the mirror, seemingly cutting off all access points. Oh boy. In good news though, everything is in the hospital room to make the full compact. A piece the ideal Maki left behind, the compact the real Maki was wearing, and a piece hidden away in the corner of a room, possibly by Aki. With a full compact formed, the group is able to make it back to the ideal world and specifically land in the Lost Forest's entrance, exactly where they need to be. Maki's mom is also here. Very convenient, but also I'm very jealous that she's able to get past all the demon encounters and make it through the subway with very little problems. In reality, she just blacked out, and somehow landed here after hearing Maki's voice, much like the first time. But I won't imagine she just made it through all the hordes of enemy encounters with no problem. Venturing out to the gingerbread house once more, we find Mai, who, unlike the ideal Maki, does recognize her mother. While the moment is nice at first, Mai lets everyone know that there's a fourth Maki in the mix, one who's infinitely worse than Aki. This one is a little easier to grasp in concept though, named Pandora. If you're unaware of the tale of Pandora's box, the 3-sentence summary is that Zeus gifted Pandora with a box containing many evils as to punish her brother, Prometheus, for stealing fire from the heavens. Pandora then opened the box, which released a whole bunch of plights onto the world. Illness, famine, greed, envy, so on and so forth, to include pretty much everything that ails mankind. The only thing left inside the box was what humanity needed most to face everything that had been unleashed: hope. Pandora, in the game's case, has been consumed by all of these evils and wants nothing but the assured destruction of everything. Much the same as Kandori did at one point, but with much greater conviction. Fortunately, Najo's deduction skills are back in full force, piecing together that to get to Pandora, they need to go through the big door that's in the school's library. As for the ideal Maki, Mai lets the squad know that she's in the deepest part of the forest, making things super easy. After some twists and turns, the team finds the ideal Maki laying down on yet another bed, this time without a face. The symbolism here is quite clear. The ideal Maki has lost sight of her true self and can no longer face who she is, convinced that she brings only destruction wherever she goes. The truth of the matter, though, is that we all have our ugly moments, but the only way to grow is by looking at ourselves in the mirror, acknowledging we messed up, and do better moving forward. In this game's case, we have a pretty extreme example, but that's the lesson to be gained here. Maki wants nothing but reassurance that she is nothing but this horrible person, but the entire party tries to impart the wisdom I just spoke a little bit ago. that you need to face yourself and that you can't just run away from your problems. You're also given the option on what to say during this dialogue, and while the option you should be choosing is pretty crystal clear here, this will be important later. This will be the last option you need to choose, so at this point, breathe easy. Thanks to some sage words from Nanjo once more, Maki is able to snap out of her stasis, ready to face the worst parts of herself. The party is able to make up for the bickering they've had throughout the game, ready to work as a collective unit once more. Before the team can head to the school's library to face Pandora, or Mai, there's one more fight they need to take on. The Elated Cavern, where Maki's consciousness currently floats within the Sea of Souls and is holding the third compact needed to open the door of the library. To access the cavern, the kids need to get to the shrine, which once again means Philemon time. He doesn't really tell the kids anything new this time, but does set up the challenge for the dungeon. That it's only to be you and Maki traversing through the cavern based on the desires of a real Maki. This dungeon kinda sucks, unless you have Hama skills on deck. Fittingly, the most notable enemies here are floating masks, based on 6 of the 7 deadly sins, with just gluttony missing. An odd one to be missing, but if you want a hint on how to remove these guys easy, have some expel skills like Hama on standby to make your life much easier against them. Before the duo get to the Sea of Souls though, they find their protagonist. A different version of him anyway, sitting at an arcade cabinet. This part, in simple terms, is your "Were you a good person" test, by checkboxing all the actions you made throughout the game. The decisions I told you would be important later. It's through these decisions that you get some totem items, which you can use to create the ultimate personas for each party member. I'll run through all 6 in total in chronological order. Number 1, the nurse from the beginning of the game. You obviously need to help save her instead of leaving her to die, as you should always be willing to help those in need if you have the ability to do so. Number 2, the buttons outside the Deva system. The correct answer here is the red button to save Dr. Nikolai's life. I've pressed the blue button a number of times trying to abide by Nikolai's wishes, but red is the more humanitarian option, as there should be a way to stop Kandori without sacrificing someone's life, despite their willingness to do so. Number 3, the paintings. The correct answer here is to say Maki's is better. Choosing to stick by your friends instead of letting someone in a power position hear what they want to hear because it would be convenient in that moment. Basically, don't lie for the sake of lying. Number 4, Maki's mother in the Haunted Mansion. This one's more a test of conviction, seeing if you're able to discern the truth and remembering you're in a world heavily controlled by Kandori, thus being able to manipulate appearances as he sees fit. Number 5, the answer you give Kandori about why you live. It's a simple truth. We all need a reason to live and must stay mindful in seeking it. Ignoring that search could prove to be fatal, both physically and spiritually. Number 6, your response to the ideal Maki in the Lost Forest. This one's another matter of conviction, bouncing off of your answer to Kandori and by extension your answer to Mai during the 3 prawn segment in the Lost Forest. You just need to reassure her that she needs to face herself just like everyone else in the party is doing. If you clear all 6 of these checks, you'll be given enough totem items to grab everyone's ultimate personas. These will be covered in the character analysis section, but at the very least, create Amon-Ra, the ultimate persona of the protagonist. This will absolutely be important later for reasons I'll cover during the gameplay section. The fact that it's the protagonist handing you these items is simply a reminder that just like Maki, there's many versions of all of us. The important thing is to act true to yourself and to try to help out those around you when you can, even if the going is rough. Once you get past the protagonist room, you'll continue on your way down to the depths of the Elated Cavern and to the Sea of Souls. Here, the ideal Maki confronts the real Maki, sharing the conviction she gained in the Lost Forest, and mentions that you can't run away from your problems. You have to face them. only then can you grow as a person. Otherwise, those problems will fester and follow you like a shadow. The real Maki in the Sea of Souls is convinced by this speech at the very least, giving the ideal Maki the final compact and letting the party enter the final dungeon in the library, known as the Avidya World. Once final preparations are complete, you'll face a long, trap-filled dungeon with few chances to resupply, unless you backtrack all the way to the start. This does also include saving, so please, try to prepare yourself as much as possible before going against Pandora. You do not want to lose north of 2 hours of progress thinking you got this and coming off the Mana Persona games where you think you could just retry the boss fight right away. Early Sona does not play like that, trust me, I'm trying to save you here. Anyways, once you get through that long dungeon, you're greeted to this monstrosity, who, as stated earlier, just wants everything to cease existing. Now, you might be wondering how exactly this form of Maki came to be in this world. So, remember Aki, the little gremlin she is, and how she disappeared from the hospital room shortly after Kandori's death? Well, when she disappeared, she came here to the Avidya World to wake up Pandora to bring about the destruction Kandori said he wanted. Unfortunately for Aki, though, Pandora kind of said these hands are rated E for everyone and gobbled her up, which amplified Pandora's powers. Rest in peace, Small Gremlin. While the dialogue with Pandora isn't much to go through, we do have two forms to analyze. The ugly as hell form we start off with is exactly that, an ugly form. We can see Maki's face protruding from the top part. My best interpretation would be that this version of Maki has let all of her negative thoughts consume her, with the only visible part of her left representing hope. Maybe not the best interpretation of his freak show, but hey, it's the one I've got. If you have any better, let me know in the comments. Seriously, I'd love to know. This thing is food. As for the butterfly form, it actually ties back to the poem that plays at the very beginning of the game, which I'll read to you now from Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi. I dreamt I was a butterfly. I couldn't tell I was dreaming, but when I woke, I was I, and not a butterfly. Was I dreaming that I was a butterfly? Or was the butterfly dreaming that it was me? Even if there's a difference between the butterfly and I, the distinction isn't absolute, and there is no relationship of cause and effect. This once again acts as a way for us to think about who we really are, and in the context of this final fight, almost acts as a final plea to Maki to let her nihilism take over. The ideal Maki is far past that point though. Knowing the road to growth comes from self-improvement, not destructive tendencies. Once the arduous fight is finally won, a brief conversation begins, highlighting some themes learned on the journey, that you need to face your problems directly instead of wallowing, and no matter what you're going through, you're not going to be alone. There's always going to be someone that can help you out, so don't close yourself away from the world. Pandora accepts this small speech and fades away, completing the Persona 4 dungeon arc in much longer time, and with guns. The ideal Maki realizes she needs to stay in this world, sending everyone off on their way. Except for Naoya. Maki needed to give Naoya a kiss before he went, to show off her true feelings. That probably explains why her soul was calling out for him as well as Maki during the Alea Cavern dungeon outside of just game reasons, honestly. Our journey ends with congratulations and T-pose from Philemon. Stills with text from a movie the developers wanted to place onto the end of Persona 1, but simply couldn't. A meetup at Peace Diner in the mall with the party members you took with you throughout the journey, and some ending text for the main cast, including the party members you did not take with you. With that, the SEBEC route is officially done. When I compared this game to the third semester of Persona 5 Royal earlier, I meant every word of that. Both share the exact same theme of having the strength to face the future, no matter what lies ahead. There's some comfort in slipping into what's easy or known to be sure, But by doing so, you're unable to grow, leaving you in a loop that's eventually going to create misery. In Persona 1's case, this is mostly showcased through Maki's journey, starting off as a bedridden girl before literally exploring multiple sides of a character, culminating in a few character discovery moments and a fight to save Maki from herself. If this were any other game in the series, this is where we move into analyzing the characters a little bit more. But first, we have a bit of a frosty detour to make. This detour will be using PSP footage because while everything needed for the quest is in the PS1 version, most of the text is not translated and has been rendered unplayable as a result. More on that later though. For now, ladies and gentlemen, I bring to you Act 2, the Snow Queen route. Let's rewind the clock on the SEBEC route real quick, to when we arrived back at school following the events at the hospital and at the shrine. Obviously, there's our intended path that we're told pretty clearly, but what if we decided to fool around and explore the school a little bit? Well, talk to the right people, you might just find something a little different. Cool, even. The Snow Queen quest. To unlock the Snow Queen route, you have to follow a very specific set of steps. Number 1, talk to this lone student in class 2-4, staring at the wall the same way Yukari does. She mentions Devil Boy, who is Tsutomu, so let's head to him next. Number 2, Tsutomu will talk about the Snow Queen play with 2 key pieces. 1, the play is always performed with a mask, which is supposedly cursed. 2, there's just one lone survivor of the people who have performed as a Snow Queen, but no one currently knows who. Number 3, Naoya heads over to the drama club since they might know something. Unfortunately, they really don't. Best they have is telling Naoya to look for any records. There's a couple ways to read this, but record keeping is part of the student council's responsibilities, so let's head there. Number 4, the student council president doesn't feel like doing his job today, only really telling Naoya to go speak to a living piece of history. As such, he needs to seek out the olds, the principal and vice principal. Number 5, apparently news gets around this school fast, because Miss Uishi already knows Naoya has been looking into the play. Principal Uishi confirms for Naoya that not only did the mask have some weird vibes, but also that the last person to play the Snow Queen was our lovely Miss Seiko. However, something happened 8 years ago that caused Miss Seiko to lose her best friend. After these events, the mask was apparently purified and sealed away in storage, but given this is a Persona game, you can bet someone along the way messed up. Last things last, let's go find that box. All of the red flags about people dying and weird events happening around the mask when the school absolutely could have replaced it, that can easily be ignored, right? The storage room is inside the gym, and much like the classroom scene that kicks off the game, everything is incredibly tidy and pushed off to the side except for one important piece to the puzzle. There might be some symbolism in that, but I'm choosing not to break up my inner high school English teacher. Once Naoya decides to take that cursed mask out, the Snow Queen route is locked in. Returning back to the giant hole in the wall on the first floor, Naoya can see both Mark and Maki right as they leave the school. Yukino and Ayase do their best to stop the pair, with the latter being unsure if that even is the real Maki. As we know, she is, but she really isn't. But Mark decided to deafen the call real quick before dropping out with Maki, so doesn't even really matter. In this rendition of events, Najo was the reckless one, getting hurt with Mark, Brown, and Ellie bringing him back to safety. As for Maki and Mark, my guess is they're going to continue the assault on SEBEC, which is incredibly risky, but we don't really have to worry about those two goobers. That just leaves a matter of Reiji, who's basically MIA for this route, so maybe don't worry about him this time. Miss Seiko walks in on a commotion, getting stopped from chasing after Mark and Maki by the girls. This is where Miss Seiko notices the mask in Naoya's hand, which prompts her to recount the tale of the Snow Queen. The short of it is that a demon made a cursed mirror to fight God in heaven, but along the way up, the mirror broke. The shards fell down back to Earth, cursing those who were unfortunate enough to have shards of a mirror fall into their eyes with closed-off hearts. seeing the world as nothing but an ugly place and casting everyone away with a bitter disdain. This fate befell two kids that were close friends, Kay and Gerda. Kay had a shard fall into his eyes, and as a result began to treat Gerda horribly, despite being such close friends. Under the curse, a Snow Queen arrived and whisked Kay away. For what reasons I'm not entirely sure. The game doesn't get into it, nor does the actual play based on some Googling I did. She just kind of exists. The always present figure that she is. The best I have is that the Snow Queen has Kay try to spell the word eternal in ice, most likely a trick to freeze him permanently. With the Heart of Innocence though, and a typical fairy tale trek, Gerda is able to make her way to the Snow Queen's castle and rescue a half-frozen Kay thanks to the bond that the two of them shared. It's a simple tale of sticking by your friends no matter the circumstances, and to never give up on someone. If that sounds familiar to what went on with Maki in the SEBEC route, it should, as this route was basically made as a parallel to the main route. A little bonus path for those that beat the SEBEC route but still wanted more time with the characters, if you will. Back to what's happening in the school, you know all of those rumors and deaths that everyone talked about, right? How Miss Seiko lost a friend 8 years ago and how she was the only living person who had previously worn the mask? Yeah, so about that, Miss Seiko decided to throw caution to the wind for the hell of it, which unfortunately leads to some catastrophic events, as if what happened in the hospital in town wasn't bad enough. With a flash of light, the Snow Queen mask begins to take full effect, closing the school off from the rest of the world and encasing it completely in ice. Basically the same setup as when we were dealing with the Harem Queen, but now we're cold and we can't gamble. So, infinitely worse. The mask is now in complete control of Miss Seiko, actively taunting her in front of our current trio. Not that the being possessing Miss Seiko likes that turn of phrase, but that's a matter of truth. It does formally introduce itself as the Snow Queen proper, and quickly spells out its plans. Evidently, Miss Seiko is going to be a sacrifice to bring about the Eternal Night, which I'm sure will be detailed in due time. Ayase takes the matter to mean that the world's going to be cold forever. Never change, girly. Before vanishing, the Snow Queen leaves the trio with one of our two main objectives for this route. Climb the 3 towers open to them that surround the school and take out their rulers. She mentions something about doing it before the clock strikes 12, and while the route itself has no time limit, the dungeons themselves do. More on that in the gameplay section. After the Snow Queen leaves, Ayase takes a moment to give the second biggest callout of the entire game next to the localization's first line. Why did Naoya take out the mask? Was it just a curiosity kill the cat type thing? Sure, the school's at fault for just leaving it out in the open like that, but we were given so many warnings. It's mind-boggling. Too late now, but A+ Ayase, good job. Before the trio can go anywhere, however, our favorite glowing signpost returns to inform everyone about their second main objective, the Demon Mirror, which is how they'll be able to free Miss Seiko from a curse. It's currently just a frame, however, as while we go around clearing the towers, we'll need to find a total 12 shards to complete the mirror. In totality, there's actually 13 shards out there, but at most we can only collect 12. We'll cross that bridge when we get to that, though, in the gameplay section. All you really need to know for right now is that we just need to find a minimum 8 shards in order to get the good ending here of a possible 2, so keep a careful eye out when climbing the towers. With a warning that the kids don't have much time for their task, Philemon vanishes once more. After Philemon gives the spiel, we quickly get Yukino's motivation in all this, despite the obvious. Yukino is a former delinquent, but thanks to guidance from Miss Seiko, Yukino's been able to turn her life around a fair bit. Feeling indebted, she'll do everything she can in order to save her teacher. Easy to get behind and noble. Love you, Yukino. 2 other things to note here, though. 1, we're a small party right now, so we're definitely going to need to round up some help for this quest. 2, in this version of events, Najo already came back with some guns and gave them to Yuka for safekeeping. So at least we can keep the American aspect of all this. To grab the other 2 team members, much like Ellie's recruitment of a SEBEC route, we just need to visit some locations and talk to who we want in the party. In this route's case, we have the options of Nanjo, Brown, and Ellie to tag along with Naoya, Yukino, and Iyase, since there are the remaining 3 still in the school, as Reiji is most likely in Maki's ideal world right now. Obviously, pick whoever you want, but if you did the Reiji recruitment in SEBEC, it only feels right to pick up both Brown and Ellie for this operation. Before our fully formed group can make any progress though, we've a player here of a commotion going on in the cafeteria, where the student by the name of Toro is being held back from food given the school's, case in ice, and rationing is kind of important at this moment. Toro wants to hear none of it, however, as the guy loves food and is dealing with Ayase's pretty cold yet funny for Twitter rejection on top of the stressful situation. This whole moment is the catalyst for Ayase to wake up to her persona Hori, the beautiful prize awaiting men in paradise per Islamic teachings, thanks to yet another meet and greet given by the Butterfly Man. Literally just giving everyone a persona, aren't you, buddy? No wonder you're tired by the time of eternal punishment, dear God. At any rate, with everyone now having their personas, we're able to tackle the 3 towers the Snow Queen set up for us. The cool thing about this route is we can basically choose our own difficulty, going about the 3 towers in whichever way we like. Obviously, play however you want. I'll go about these in difficulty order, but if you're wanting to grab all the ultimate personas for your party, do these in the opposite order, with the hardest being first. Since there's no overarching plot between the 3, these summations should both be on the shorter side and mostly just about the figures and what they represent. Given the entire SEBEC route, I will very happily take that reprieve. Anyway, let's begin with the Hypnos Tower. The ruler of Hypnos Tower is Kumi Hirose, a student who had previously played the Snow Queen, which is a trait all 3 of the rulers will share, and is pretty much the only thing that ties them together. The team properly meets her guardian, Hypnos, as well as a dream version of Kumi who relays her tragic tale about halfway into the dungeon. Kumi's story is simply that of pressure, and not being able to handle it properly. She was an incredibly gifted student, but the drama club were not perceptive to her valuing schoolwork the way they thought she did, going as far to think Kumi was ignorant due to her voicing that her parents were upset that she wasn't number 1. On the opposite side of the fence was Kumi's father, who basically cast all his resentment onto her, saying in short that she can't even repay him the favor of giving up drinking, smoking, and golf with solid grades in school. Given these 2 factions are pretty much all Kumi knew at this point, she felt isolated with no means of escape, unable to please anyone. Kumi eventually got to wishing that she could just stay in the world of dreams, as that's the only place she could truly be free and valued by others. This emphasis on dreams and escaping through sleep is what leads to Kumi's guardian being Hypnos. Yukino, after hearing the story, gives her a whole okay and moment, which Kumi absolutely does not take well. The whole team does, actually. While part of me sympathizes with Kumi on the front of dealing with her issues, the heart of the team's argument is that there were plenty of other ways to deal with her issues than just giving up. Of course, it came across in a pretty cold package, but hey, that's the truth of the matter. After a fight with Hypnos in the throne room, Kumi begins to see the errors in her way of thinking. Dreams are not meant to be lived in, just to strive for and achieve. They're a motivating force to keep us going, but if you let yourself get wrapped up and consumed in that dream, eventually you'll burn yourself out and have nothing left to strive for, leading you to a situation like Kumi's. If you remember the whole thing with Kandori, this is pretty much that again, just in the package of a small teenage girl. With acceptance that she shouldn't just blame everyone else, but also hold herself accountable, Kumi fades away into the night. Yukino takes a moment to go, okay, maybe she wasn't actually that bad after the team berated her 3 different times, but that moment is short and sweet as team gets ready to scale the second tower. Nemesis Tower is headed up by Michiko Matsudaira, a rather haughty ruler, especially in comparison to that nerd we just dealt with a little bit ago. Unlike Kumi and our final guardian, though, Michiko doesn't really have a tragic tale as to what did her in. Looking into Nemesis, her guardian and the Greek goddess of retribution, doesn't allow us that much of a look into Michiko either. Even her post-dialogue fight doesn't give us much of anything, in sharp contrast to Kumi, more so coming off as a Neville Papperman type or a Saturday morning cartoon villain who had all of this power and used it to destroy everyone around her, but could not handle people doing the same in return, believing them to be the bullies instead of her. I wish I had more substance to offer with Michiko, I really do, but I just don't. There's probably a reason why the Persona 1 manga decided to exclude her entirely when covering the Snow Queen arc. This girl is just so different compared to everything else going on. If I had to guess what this segment has to do with the main themes, I'd say it's a much more wrathful take on Maki's ideal world. Michiko was able to shape her surroundings how she saw fit, in her case thanks to wealth and quite a bit of social power. There comes a point, though, where you need to let go of control and let things happen so you can grow, but Michiko couldn't, continuing to blame others for her problems and seeking revenge when she's so much worse. The Snow Queen does seem to be very vengeful in nature, so the inclusion here is most likely to serve as a power indicator, if nothing else. An odd step to make, but one that was taken, so let's just shuffle on over to our final guardian. Meet Yuriko Yamamoto, our final tower ruler, complete with one of the best portraits we've ever seen in the series. Girly is serving full girl boss diva. Love that for her. Seen over Thanatos Tower, at first Yuriko seems like a breath of fresh air after the events in Nemesis Tower, being incredibly upbeat. In truth though, Yuriko is very deceptive. She gives the party a hint to blow out one of the two candles in order to open the door and proceed. However, doing so causes either Naoya or Yukino to temporarily lose their persona, now trapped in an area known as Tartarus. You can and should get whichever party member's persona you lost from the decision. Just know that the reclaim point, Tartarus, is through a pretty deep detour on the second floor, so tread very carefully. Yuriko continues to toy with the party on the 6th floor, as they are given a choice between receiving a mirror shard or activating a trap that would seal Ayase's persona. There is a correct choice. I listed those two in that order for a reason. You're smart, I believe in you. Make the right call. Anyway, once the team gets to the top of the tower and after a fight with her guardian, Thanatos, we get a little bit more on Yuriko's story. Yuriko really had everything going for her socially, but one fear reared its ugly head in the worst way possible. What if everything goes downhill from here? Like, sure, she's pretty unpopular now, but will it still be this way when she's older? Probably not, per her fears. Fears that the Snow Queen latched onto and amplified before Yuriko ended up taking her own life so she could preserve herself as she currently was. It's sort of a flip of Kumi's story, where Yuriko was living in her dream scenario and never wanted to leave it instead of needing to escape to her dreams in order to feel it for just a moment. Yuriko comes away as the most sympathetic of the three as a result of her personality and eager acceptance of her own flaws, finally able to pass on from this realm after the party is able to relate to her struggles pretty well. It's a shame that Yuriko is only mentioned by Ayase in the manga. I really do find her tale to be the most compelling of the three, but alas, such is fate. With all three guardians taken down, let's rewind and recap a little bit. We've been given 3 important names and an important term, so it's time to put all those puzzle pieces together. The 3 gods that have served as our guardians for our 3 rulers were Hypnos, Nemesis, and Thanatos. All 3 of these gods are from Greek mythology, and in fact share the exact same parents. The context clue of the Eternal Night also gives us what this god, or rather goddess, is the personification of. If any Persona 3 alarm bells went off earlier, your senses have been well sharpened, because the correct answer here is Nyx, a primordial deity in Greek mythos and one who gave birth to many figures who represent the negative aspects of human existence. Of course, there's Nemesis and Thanatos, representing retribution and death respectively, but then you also have the likes of Moros, Her, Oisis, the Morai, Apate, and Eris.
None of those names past Thanatos really mean much to what we have going on in the Snow Queen route, but whenever I see something when researching for a video, I like to share it, you know? Back to the plot proper though, with the requisite shards in hand and all the rulers defeated, it's time to go free Miss Seiko from the clutches of the Snow Queen.
Once we get back to the courtyard with a mirror filled with enough shards to form a proper reflection, Naya holds it up and... oh, wow, really is just that easy. Neat! A spirit with a half-frozen face then emerges from the mask, pissed that everyone is taking Seiko's side, and promptly starts up a quick fight as in a large mask. After a pretty easy fight, Miss Seiko regains her consciousness and begins telling the party about someone named... Tomomi?
Tomomi? Ain't no Tomomi girl living here, so what?
Get your crackhead ass into some rehab. I ain't got time for this bullshit.
Sorry. I had to. Anyway. Tomomi was Miss Seiko's best friend from her drama club days, the spirit that we saw right before the fight and one of the Snow Queen actresses. Miss Seiko lands a pretty good line here. Sometimes you hurt people without realizing it. This launches into a flashback of Tomomi and Miss Seiko in high school, where we find out that Miss Seiko and Tomomi were both in competition for the Snow Queen role. Miss Seiko, however, dropped out being scared of the rumors and instead of warning Tomomi, just let it happen. It's not like Miss Seiko was intentionally trying to hurt her best friend, rather the opposite, but the effects of a simple action speak for themselves. The lovely teacher begins to try to blame herself, but the party talks her out of it, reaffirming that this is a consequence she simply did not know about. This conversation wraps up with the party noticing the school still frozen, and thus a happily ever after moment has not arrived. At this moment, Nyx rises from the ground, joyous that she's free from Tomomi and is ready to launch the Eternal Night. To achieve this, Nyx evidently needs to go to the top of the ice castle, really a fourth tower, for the player to climb with some interesting puzzle work. While you're climbing up, there's actually some pretty curious cameos in the classrooms. For one, Mai appears, seeking out a version of herself specifically wearing a mask. The intent is clearly to goad the player into finding this cameo, but the phrasing of finding herself is pretty interesting. We can find Maki later on, indeed wearing a mask and actually painting, tying back once again to some dialogue during the SEBEC route's Harem Queen plot beat. This version of Maki is completely wrapped in nihilism, wishing she had the same companionship everyone in the party does and is ready to destroy everything as a result of feeling so rejected. A very clear parallel to the latter half of the SEBEC route, to be sure. Aki comes next, playing a very similar role to Mai, but in this case is goading the player to try to find Kandori. We eventually find him alongside the Snow Queen and this parallel version of Maki, with Maki and Kandori promising to help the Snow Queen out in her bid to destroy the world. Kandori decides to make this just a little more fun though, basically acting as a teleporter including up to the top floor instead of doing anything inherently standoffish. A part of you might be wondering, why Maki and Kandori? They haven't really been brought up at all during this plot so far, so why now in this plotline's final hour? Simply put, both of their arcs touch upon what Nyx's power is built on: nihilism. To recap what we discussed earlier during the SEBEC route, Maki's most repressed feelings want nothing but the assured destruction of everything due to feeling isolated and at points rejected, not really knowing where her place in the world is as a result, and, as such, wants everyone to feel that same level of discardment. Kandori, on the other hand, continued to seek more and more power, wanting to destroy his surroundings in a grasp for control more than anything else. Nyx wants the Eternal Night, the end of everything, so these two characters acting as her support fits like a glove. On the rooftop, we find Nyx quite literally being held up by Maki and Kandori, very quickly launching into a fight ready to start her everlasting darkness. This fight on paper is pretty difficult, but can be completely trivialized if you have the right setup. Oh, that Lilim on screen? Don't worry about it, not trying to hint anything there, I promise. After the fight, Nyx fades away pretty quickly, stating that the Eternal Night will come so long as humans desire utter destruction. If that sounds familiar to pretty much every modern Persona final boss's speech, you're right, it absolutely does. The more interesting part of this scene, though, comes from Maki and Kandori. Maki claims that this was her world, and thus was probably another offshoot of her nihilism if true. Kandori, on the other hand, states that he'll most likely see Naoya again, a tease at the SEBEC route. With the school now returned to normal, the team sets off to find Maki and Mark, with Yukino also promising to try to follow in Miss Seiko's footsteps. After some stills and a credit roll, we find Mark right outside the school, begging everyone to help him at the SEBEC building to both rescue Maki and continue with the quest fair. You'd think narratively the plotline would just continue into SEBEC with some callbacks to the Snow Queen quest along the way, a sort of a New Game Plus type deal, but no. The Snow Queen quest unfortunately ends here, and we never get to see those paths converge. This supplementary route was exactly that within the context of Persona 1, a means of giving the player more to do while hitting on the same themes. In this case, it's to not give up on those around you and to find an alternate path to solving your problems when you feel like there's absolutely nothing left. Ayase and Yukino, our two required members, I'd say make a much stronger case as to why they're required instead of Najo and Mark. With the boys, they kinda just play opposites to each other to keep up the comedy, but don't really do too much in terms of actual plot relevance. Definitely more so Najo, but regardless, the plot is solely focused on Maki, so In the Snow Queen quest, though, we get the point of never giving up on anyone very clearly through Yukino, a student who rummaged around as a delinquent for the longest time, but thanks to a calm and steady hand by Miss Seiko, Yukino's now able to turn her life around for the better and start a new beginning. Ayase does take some warming up to, but if you cut past a rough exterior, you could see a character who does genuinely care about everyone around her. Sure, she has some not-so-spectacular moments, but especially once Yuriko accepts her own flaws, we can see the goodness within Ayase's heart. In whole, though, between character moments and the second angle to view Persona 1's message through, the Snow Queen quest is a very worthy addition to the framework of Persona 1, and one that players should absolutely try at some point, regardless of skill level.
もしも私があくまでも好きと言ってくれますか
悪魔青春 RPG ペルソナアトラス
With the storybook now closed, I think it's only fitting that we take a deeper look at our main cast, figure out who they are as people as we know them during the game, and what their arcana and persona mean to them. I did just spend the last decent bit saying Maki 127 times after all. I think it's only fair we take the lens just a tiny bit closer. I did do a fair bit of research, but I'll be honest from a jump here, mythology is not my forte, so if I mispronounce anything or get something wrong, I do apologize. Please correct me in the comments, just don't be mean about it, please. My goal within this section is to inform, not mislead. We'll start where all things begin, the protagonist. Naoya Tudu, or the boy with earring, is your stock, silent protagonist. There's some options you're able to make with Naoya along the way, such as his name and whether or not you'd like to save the nurse's spine from being snapped in half by the famous Amos cookies dispenser. But the only real dialogue that we see coming out of Naoya isn't really Naoya's, but rather a version of himself in the Elea Cavern. I think a fair assumption to make is that Naoya is observant, taking in his scenery and making the best moves in accordance with the surroundings. Assuming the true ending is the canon ending, complete with gaining all the totem items for the ultimate personas of each party member, we can gain the information that Naoya is also a compassionate being. Blunt at times, as seen with the Elea Cavern aspect once again, but compassionate. Naoya's starting persona is Seimin Kangu, a figure that takes on the many sides approach to Persona 1 very clearly. I mentioned earlier on that Seimin Kangu, in Japanese Buddhist text, is a protector deity with power over the evil that it once spread. Per Hindu text, however, Seimin Kangu is a Rakshasa, unrighteous beings who are quite wicked in previous lives. so we have one text without a redemption arc and another text with one. In his official art, we also see the 3 wise monkeys. In the context of a game, I think the imagery is quite clear. Keep an honest heart, keep evils at bay, and always be ready to help those around you. A perfect fit for a character of the Emperor Arcana, an arcana shaped around the ideas of leadership and standing your ground even if your position can come into doubt. It's about being able to keep a level head and being able to lead those around you toward a better future. Such qualities also perfectly fit Nadia's ultimate persona, Amun-Ra, a being that could be thought of as the king of the Egyptian gods. Given that Amun could be translated to the Invisible One, with Ra representing revealed divinity, given its place in-game, I believe a fair reading here would be that this persona only comes out after Nadia gets in touch with who he truly is, able to draw forth that power and shine a light for his compatriots. For Amun-Ra, I did specifically call him Nadia's primary ultimate persona, and that's because he technically gets 2. If you're willing to put in the work and collect every single spell card in the game, of which there's 142, you can use Gandharva and Yaxani to summon Vishnu, the figure that you can see on only the localized Persona 1's loading screens. Honestly, before typing these last couple lines, I had no clue that was Vishnu's position in this game, so that's really cool. Vishnu's role in the Hindu pantheon is to preserve balance in the world, and in Persona 1's case, act as a king of persona users, per Kazuma Kaneko, aided by Vishnu creating as many avatars of himself as need be to achieve world peace. Next up is the leading lady of the pack, Maki Sanomura. Maki I'm going to keep mercifully short, given I had a whole 15 pages in this Google Doc dedicated to her tale, but the gist is that Maki is a girl that enjoys the simple things in life, but thanks to her illness, has become increasingly distraught and unhappy with the world around her. Maki is of the Priestess Arcana, an arcana which usually represents the subconscious mind, spiritual knowledge, and intuition. During Maki's hospital stay, we can see a reverse state of the Priestess Arcana, with Maki simply wanting to keep everyone away. The spiritual knowledge part is of high interest to me, however, given we meet Maki's mom in the shrine several times throughout the journey. It's a nice little family connection, low as Maki at the beginning of the game would be to admit it. Maki's initial persona is Maso, a Chinese goddess of the sea that protects fishermen and sailors from the dangers of the sea. The connection here can be seen quite clearly both in the ideal Maki's purpose in the party as well as during the Sea of Souls segment of the game, with Maki acting as quite a bit of a leader throughout the campaign and ready to heal at a moment's notice thanks to her persona's skills. In the Sea of Souls, the ideal Maki is trying to protect her real self from, well, herself. Keep the nihilism at bay. An odd choice on paper, but once you realize those two aspects, it's easy to see why Maso came to mind for the developers. For Maki's ultimate persona, she gains Verdandi, one of the 3 Norns of Norse mythology. As the Norns decide the fate of mankind, and Verdandi in particular represents the present, my understanding is that by the time you get Verdandi, you'd be on your way to fight Pandora. As such, it's up to Maki to pull together her willpower in this moment to guide her friends in the right direction, and save not only them, but everyone else from Pandora's destruction. Moving along to our first of 2 mandatory SEBEC party members, we have Kei Nanjo, who's trying to make it clear that he's the #1 man in Japan with his goofy little scarf. I'm not entirely sure what being the #1 man in Japan means exactly, but hey, you go for it, Nanjo. You have my support. Of the Hierophant Arcana, Nanjo exemplifies quite a few traits to the letter, most notably in his way of authority both in the party when it comes to what to do, as well as his position in the Nanjo group. For you Persona 3 people out there that remember this group being brought up all of once, here you go. Here's a connection. Still no clue on what the Nanjo group actually does, but hey, this is your man. Nanjo's initial persona is Aizen Miyowu, who doesn't exactly seem like the best fit, I won't lie. Being a great wisdom king per Japanese mythos? Sure, great. But
there's a lot of lost connotations to this thing that doesn't really fit Nanjo's demeanor at all. If I were to give him a different figure as a persona from the same region of mythos, I'd go with Fukurokuju, one of Japan's 7 lucky gods and known for both knowledge and longevity. A very interesting factoid that leads me to choose Fukurokuju is that he's the only one of the 7 lucky gods that can resurrect the dead. How is that relevant here? Well, you remember Yamaoka, the butler at the start of a game that fell victim to the zombie uprising pretty quickly? Since personas are guardians in almost every sense of the word, Nanjo takes Yamaoka's speech of always being in his heart literally, and is able to give rise to Yamaoka as his ultimate persona. Given Yamaoka doesn't moonlight as a deity or anything, there's not really much to analyze past that point, but I do really like his design as a persona. Very fitting for the guardian angel status this man has taken on. In sharp contrast to Nanjo's stern, authoritative self, we have Masao Iniba, otherwise known as Mark, and not Izanami taking on yet another form as an entire city. Mark is laid back and fun-loving, with a rebellious streak as evidenced in his graffiti work, and a brashness that embodies the Chariot Arcana. Representing things like self-assertion and self-confidence, we're able to see those aspects pop out time and time again from Mark, especially in confrontation with Nanjo. Mark's starting persona is Ogun, which, as we discussed earlier, is a Yoruba spirit associated with introducing man to iron. In terms of personality, descriptions of Ogun are pretty much in line with Mark. Abundance of energy while also being a fierce warrior. When upset, Ogun will turn on those he previously supported, similar to how Mark will butt heads with Nanjo after being provoked. Later on, Mark will be able to utilize the power of Susanoo, a figure I'm sure many of you are aware of thanks to being both the ultimate persona of the Fool Arcana in Persona 3, as well as the Trash Man's ultimate persona. I think it's actually the only persona to serve as the ultimate for more than one party member across the series, so that's pretty interesting to think about. Susanoo in general is a little hard to pin down due to there being many different portrayals throughout Japanese myth, but I want to say what they were going for was a continuation of Ogun's warrior pathing. One of the main aspects surrounding Susanoo is his prowess as a warrior, specifically in how he took down Yamata no Orochi. For those not familiar with the figures, much like myself, think of it as a Hercules slaying the Hydra in his movie, except the heads don't grow back. Thank God. Either way, a very noble and powerful warrior, fitting for a character like Mark who can really strike should he be given the chance to shine. Jumping over to the Snow Queen quest's mandatory party members real quick, let's talk about one Yuka Ayase. A member of the Magician Arcana, Yuka doesn't really hide anything about her thoughts or feelings, much to a fault. This can be seen in our scene with Toro, where, while comical for the player, is insanely rude for the question he's asking. She does eventually learn that she needs to plan for the future instead of only living in the moment, but this process does take a while. A couple of things the Magician Arcana are tied to are action, self-confidence, and immaturity. Aspects I think we can all agree Ayase captures between Toro and her general behavior during the Snow Queen quest. In Mythos, her initial persona, Hori, is more of a prize than anything for those that are able to enter Paradise. Entering Paradise itself has its own sets of trials and tribulations, but can be done. Hori are also described as being beautiful, and given Ayase is both a woman and also perfect for Drake, but not anyone who does not want to be on a list, the most I'm going to refer to here is Toro's affections once again. Her ultimate persona is the Norse god Freyr, a very important figure that represents a few aspects, but most importantly for Ayase, fertility. Ayase does want to start her own family eventually. Not for the most thought out reasons, thinking it'll be easy street, but she does eventually want a family, which is most likely why Freyr was brought into the picture here. Since Ayase doesn't seem particularly interested in the likes of farming or weather, feel like there's a couple other figures that would probably fit better, but hey, Freyr has a horse! That's cool, we like horses! Alongside Ayase in the mandatory department is Yukino Mayazumi.
A mature 30-year and motherly figure whose calm demeanor is well matched to our arcana and personas, making for a strong introduction. Being of the Empress Arcana, Yukino falls in line with the Arcana's representation of mothers, protection, and comfort. While Yukino is a delinquent in reform, above all else she does simply want what's best for everyone and will protect the one she loves. This especially doubles for Miss Seiko, the teacher who helped Yukino get her life back in line. Yukino feels deeply indebted to Miss Seiko, especially when the teacher is trapped behind the Snow Queen's mask due to a certain reckless boy opening a forbidden box at school. Seriously, why was that even an option for now-yet kids? Rant aside, Yukino's starting persona is Vesta from Roman mythos. Being more of a living flame than an actual goddess, much like how Yukino is more of a supporting character than a proper party member in the localized Persona 1, Vesta blessed the domestic affairs of the Roman citizens. In much the same way, Yukino does her best to make sure everyone is doing just fine. Her ultimate persona, Durga, captures this trait and then some. Above all else, Durga is self-sufficient, compassionate, fearless, and patient. She embodies the creative feminine force, being a form of Devi, which is the supremely radiant goddess. Given how Yukino acts throughout the Snow Queen quest, it's hard not to see this as anything but a perfect fit for our favorite knife thrower. Out of the mandatories and into the optionals, next up on our list is Hirihiku Ueseki, otherwise known as Brown. As any Persona 1 discussion will eventually remind you, the poor guy earned that colorful nickname because he couldn't hold it together in middle school. Literally.
Oh, crap!
Not sure why he'd wear that like a badge of honor or bring it up when the team's trying to figure out how to get back to Maki's ideal world, but that's a thing, alright. Brown mostly acts as a balance between Nanjo and Mark, being plenty boastful but knowing when to lock it in for a serious moment. Brown is of the Justice Arcana, and might honestly be the only pure miss we have of the entire cast. Justice represents a strong sense of objectivity and rationality. We can kind of see this with those moments of being a balance between Nanjo and Mark, like I described, but if anything, I'd most likely assign him with the Sun Arcana for his usual positivity, even if the game disagrees with me on this matter. This confusion continues into Brown's starting persona, Nemheim, who is an aspect of Morrigan that represents the frenzy and panic of war more than anything else. Brown, however, is just more of a goofball. A bit of a show-off, sure, but with such a description, I'd expect a character who is much more of a hothead to wield. Brown's ultimate persona, Tyre, doesn't help much either, being both a war god and a god of justice. What he has almost runs counter to the self he shows in the game, as if Atlas made him a balance between Mark and Nanjo while overlooking his braggadocious side. Or maybe I'm just missing something. I'm hardly perfect after all. Love this girl, probably my favorite of the entire cast. It's our resident quirky goofball, Eriko Kirishima. On the surface, she's pretty much on to Kamiki 1.0. Interested in fashion, wants to be a model, has a crush on the protagonist, and is 1/4 American. Eriko also has a habit of getting flighty with her love of the occult, much like Anne does with sweets, especially when my man has 147 pounds of meat on his plate. We'll get to that in Eternal Punishment, though. The occult stuff, not the meat or the sweets. Ellie is a representative of the Judgment Arcana, one that usually relates to self-reflection, awakening, and purpose. Ellie is most certainly a self-assured girl, but I do feel like lovers might have suited our queen just a little better, especially given her romantic interests. Maybe I'm missing something here as well. Not sure. At any rate, her personas. Ellie starts off with Nike, the Greek goddess of victory, strength, and war. Yes, a lot of Greek gods cover war, but Nike too. Given how self-assured and confident Ellie is, this one makes a good deal of sense. Her ultimate persona is Michael, one of the main archangels who can be seen in the 3 Abrahamic mythos texts. The Christianity angle of things continues the war aspect side of things, as Michael's pretty much God's field commander. Islamic scripture has Michael acting as more of a provider, acting with a purpose, you might say. I may not entirely get Ellie's arcana, but the personas make a good deal of sense at least. Last but not least, we have the super secret character, Reiji Kido. As stated earlier during the SEBEC story summation, Reiji is the half-brother of Kandori, and kind of lets that run his entire personality. The entire time we see the guy, he wants nothing but revenge on Kandori for what their shared dad did to Reiji's mother, which, like, fair? But you also need to be able to place your anger appropriately, you know? Then again, I'm talking about a character that first graced CRTs 30 years ago, so it's not like my lecturing will help any here. That never-ending revenge tour leads us to Reiji's first arcana, the Devil. The Devil Arcana symbolizes concepts pretty similar to the Shadow, actually, drawing out the innermost impulses and wanting to lash out violently with very little control. This can best be seen if you don't pick Reiji, with a man going through literal hordes of demons all on his own, and even making it into Maki's Ideal World's castle, just to be stopped by the man he wants to destroy more than anything. It's a self-destructive way of living, one with a time limit if not handled correctly. This can be seen with his persona, Bray, who in Irish mythos had a pretty cruel stint as king by forcing the Tuatha De Danann to become slaves with very little recourse or care, almost single-mindedly bent on continuing the tension and fighting from the Mag Torrid that led Bray to take on the position in the first place. Once the king who appointed Bray in the first place was able to properly take the throne after regaining his hand, Cain Nuada of the Tuatha De Danann, Bray was exiled with zero recourse for seizing the throne once more, even from the route of family sympathies. This exiling can also be seen as a parallel for Reiji's position in the Kandori family tree, cast aside much like his mother after Kandori's father was done with her. However, unlike Bray, we get to see this revenge properly play out. What happens after you achieve the exact thing you set out to do with such destructive tendencies? You get the Death Arcana. Reiji is the only character tied to 2 Arcana, showing that the Fool's journey isn't stagnant. Many just see death as physical death or the loss of dreams and motivation, but it can also signal rebirth and new beginnings. Once Kandori is gone, Reiji is free to live as he chooses, which the ending highlights with him starting a family. His ultimate persona, Mat, embodies death through its underworld ties, yet like Reiji, it also represents that endings also bring new paths. Moving forward means reflecting on the past, accepting it, and choosing a new future. Something Reiji ultimately achieves. In all of the discussion I've seen about Persona 1, I feel like the biggest gripe and obstacle has been with the gameplay side of things. It's definitely different from Mr. Pew Pew with the flips and the tricks, or the glossy edgy boy with the azure hair and the cool as hell posse. Sup, Aki? How you doing? This is absolutely not something that should be considered a hurdle, but with a quick explanation from yours truly, it can easily be overcome. So, to win code breakers efficiently, I recommend downloading this little tool here to help you narrow down the scenarios. Oh! We meant for dungeon crawling and combat. Got it. Okay, let me just, Alright, there we go. When you're in the dungeon, the first thing that stands out is you're in first-person view. You'll come across some rooms in each dungeon that go for an isometric view, but for the most part, seemingly endless hallways and walls, with the same texture greeting you no matter which way you turn. This can give the impression that the dungeons are randomly generated, but they're not. I feel like most of them you can just bumble through pretty blindly just by following along the map with some trial and error, but some of the later dungeons like the Video World and Ice Castle can definitely trip people up a little bit. They're just a bunch of mazes. Mazes of life, maybe? Kidding. If you need completed maps before you walk through so you don't get lost, no problem. I have a link down in the description labeled Persona Map Resource, complete with all the maps you could possibly need, which comes attached with demon traits as well. The native site is in Japanese, but Google should be able to translate it decently enough for you. If the demon info is a little hard to figure out, there's always the SMT wiki to help you there. Before we hop into battle against all of these demons though, I need to go over just one thing really quick. The character that's battle ready from the moment he joins your party, Reiji. During the SEBEC route, I kind of hinted at the guy being pretty elusive, but if you see a guy with that many abs, you obviously want to use him, right? Well, to do so, you need to follow all of these steps. This first step, all the way through step 6, have to be done before you go visit Maki in the hospital. Recruiting Reiji can only be done for the SEBEC route, however, not the Snow Queen route. Much like the Snow Queen route though, we first need to hear whispers of Reiji in order to make him appear. At least he's available in all versions of the game, right? These whispers come in the form of this teacher in the teacher's lounge. We'll tell you about how a student's been hanging out in an empty classroom on the 2nd floor. Again, as classrooms are known to be. Once you go to the classroom, funny enough the one you were in at the very start of the game, you'll find Reiji standing there silently. Before he properly talks to the party, he'll just walk away. Next, find this male student also on the 2nd floor, who will hint at a location you will visit later. Something about unused buildings needing to be torn down. Abandoned, perhaps? To be good friends with a troubled young man, of course you need to be on good terms with his mother, who you can find in a store in the Joy Street Mall. Tell her that you do know him, even if it really is only on a base level, and that you'd like to be his friend. This will give assurance to the mom, but after this moment, abandon the woman. Block her, put up your do not interact labels, do not speak to her again. For the life of me, I cannot explain to you why, but for some inexplicable reason, doing so will cause a flag to activate where you cannot recruit her child to your party of demon hunters. Like, that's weird, right? You can't tell me that's not weird. But that's Persona 1 for you, baby! After you're done in the shop, head to my favorite little place, the casino. There, talk to this blonde dork who will let you know that Reiji is a big fan of the abandoned factory. Almost like there's a connection of some kind for him there. At any rate, you have your next destination. At the abandoned factory, you'll see Reiji once more. After a pretty cryptic warning, he'll leave the area immediately, making you guys question what exactly is his problem. With step 6 done, you can now go visit Maki in the hospital. Once you get through all of those zombies though, make your way over to the SEBEC building. There you'll see Reiji picking a fight with the guards that, if he were to carry through, would certainly lead to the young man's death. Fortunately, the party's able to annoy him into living and away from the scene. From here, continue to play the SEBEC route normally. During the SEBEC route, you'll be asked a couple times by a couple different kids if they can join the team. Tell them all, no. For, simply put, they don't have enough abs. Once you make your way to the school dungeon, you'll find Reiji in a classroom on the 2nd floor, much like the start of this hunt. Once you find him, he'll join your team and thus completes the recruitment of Reiji. Recruiting Reiji requires you to be both down a man for a decent runtime of the SEBEC route, as well as some very specific steps in order to make it happen in the first place. But what you get is a very competent ally. His starting persona takes about half damage from just about everything, and with a solid enough spell list, Reiji will most definitely be of use. Speaking of spells, I know some people might have been overwhelmed by the amount of options in Personas 3 or 5, but Persona 1 gets a little too detailed. I've flown in Alexis Rhodes from Duelist Academy just to explain everything here, much like your famous classroom scene. Alexis?
Attacks can be classified into a few different categories: melee weapons, guns, havoc skills, elemental spells, force spells, light and dark spells, completely neutral spells, and a specific spell called Hieroglyphane that works differently from all of those. Melee weapons can be further broken down into the weapons a party carries: 1- and 2-handed swords both in their own categories, spears, axes, whips, throw knives, arrows, and fists. Spells can utilize these weapons as well. The guns similarly break down into individual classes: handguns, submachine guns, shotguns, and rifles. Havoc has both tech and rush included, physical spells that don't utilize weapons. Elemental spells are pretty standard, being fire, ice, wind, and earth. Force spells are similar, just a little cooler: electric, nuclear, blast, and gravity. Light magic utilizes more healing with some buffing and debuffing thrown in there, as well as a few attacking spells. Dark works similarly enough, with just a few attacking spells to its name, and most of the affinity striking for status ailments. There's a few neutral spells that won't hit any weak points or do some effects outside of battle. And finally, Hieroglyphane is specifically made for final bosses, getting resisted by everything else but doing extra damage to them. And that is every type of spell. I wish I was summarizing the Yu-Gi-Oh cards again. That's so many types of attacks.
Absolutely, way too many. Thank you so much, Alexis. The number of spells on display here is incredibly numerous and simply far too many for a first outing. Part of me likes the ambition, but no wonder people get confused. Fortunately, Persona 2 cuts down on all this a fair bit, with Persona 3 taking it further. But in due time. The sheer number of attacks here is only half the puzzle though, because for some reason, we also have areas of attack. So Persona 1 operates on a light grid system. It's a 5x5 grid that you can place your 5 party members on. The only thing is that you cannot have 2 characters directly next to each other, meaning you can't just fill up the front row and call it a day. I would highly recommend experimentation, but in terms of party formation, this is what I usually do if I'm rocking Reiji as a 5th party member for the SEBEC route. Obviously, results will change if you're using one of the other 3 optional party members, and even further if you're doing the Snow Queen route, so please, again, experiment with things and see what works out. Up in the front and center, I'd place Mark. Given Mark can only strike the front row and a tile back for a few columns with his axe, he'll want as many opportunities as possible to strike. In the top right and left corners, I would place both Reiji and Naoya. Reiji is only able to hit the row in front of him and nothing else with his gloves. But more often than not, I find myself using his spells over punches, so his placement is more for having a big resist tank up front. Naoya definitely has more reach than the other 2 boys with his sword, but if you're adapting your persona as the game develops, Naoya should be serving a pretty similar role to Reiji most of the time. In the second row, in either the second or 4th column, as those will be the only 2 spots available, I would place Nanjo. Nanjo's 2-handed swords hit for a couple more tiles back against Naoya's 1-handed sword, and he comes with a sniper rifle to boot. I find Naoya best suited for casting repeated damage with Kua or using buffs/debuffs, of which he can stack up to 7 and 4 in this game respectively. Mix that with the boy carrying, again, a sniper rifle, and a little further back is good for Nanjo. Lastly, in the back center is where I would place Maki. Maki has the least amount of HP growth in this particular party configuration, and is most inclined to either heal or do bow damage. Bows cannot hit the first 5 rows in front of him, meaning Maki needs that distance in order to properly use those attacks. Especially the skill Rapid Fire with Maso, which is incredibly potent in the early game as it can hit every enemy multiple times. She won't be able to fire her tiny little baby pistol, but Maki's got way better things to do anyway. For a list of spells and areas of effect, I'll leave a link to the Persona 1 wiki dot in the description. The website is an incredibly valuable resource for quite a few things Persona 1, including recruiting Reiji, starting the Snow Queen quest, killing the demons, and talking to them? We'll get back to that in a moment, but before we do, I want to highlight that not all party members were created equally here, and to boot, there is a second system at play. Experience in a game is usually pretty straightforward. Knock out a Pikachu in Viridian Forest, get your small amount of EXP, be on your way. Persona 1, quirky little beast that it is for the sake of being quirky, has 2 leveling systems in play here. A character level, as well as a persona level. They're not one and the same, and I wish I had some level of explanation as to why, but I really don't. The persona level indicates how high of a persona level the character can equip. For example, let's say you wanted to give Ellie the Judgment persona Azrael to gain access to the spell by Kuka. Azrael is a level 36 persona, meaning Ellie needs to have that persona level in order to equip Azrael, even if her character level is something like level 42. The persona level is raised by using persona skills in combat, whereas the character level is raised by doing any action, including using guns and melee weapons. This can lead to a bit of difference between the 2 levels, often favoring the character level, especially for a character like the protagonist, who is able to use the powerful submachine gun class of firearms, a gun type that can strike multiple times and past 5 times
for some of the more effective ones later on in the game for high damage on each strike. Some characters are naturally speedier as well, such as Naoya and Maki, leaving the likes of Mark and Nanjo generally pretty underleveled in comparison. For some reason, the developers tied experience to battle contributions, meaning faster characters level quicker while Nanjo, and especially Mark, fall behind considerably. To keep your team balanced, I recommend swapping personas for those lagging members. I recommend switching Mark and Nanjo as soon as Mark's back from a police station, while your other party members can wait since Seimin Kongu and Maso can hold up pretty well for a while. If you want me to point to specific useful personas for both of them to use early on, Xiaoqi is pretty solid defensively with a couple useful spells for Nanjo once you get him to level 17, whereas Mark would really love Bennu. Less so that he'll do actual damage with it, and more so because Bennu is fast as all hell, and comes with both Miragi and Miragu to hit the whole field. After you rank them up anyway. It's not that much to go into, but in the older titles, personas have ranks 1 through 8. Higher the rank, the more spells they can use, with the spell cost being based on the persona, not the spell. That said, we probably need some way to bring these two out so we can use these spells. First, we need to get ourselves some demons. Kind of. This game doesn't let you see all the demons or zombies or anything inside your small little high school face, but rather, you gain spell cards. Yes, the name is confusing. I absolutely agree. To get these puppies, you have to talk to the demons. For those who came in from Persona 5, like me, you're probably at least decently familiar with the concept. Much like everything else in this section though, we kinda have a little too much. Instead of having little prompts you answer, your protagonist has 4 different options in which you can interact with the demons. These demons can have up to 8 different personality traits that get mixed and matched, with some having up to 4, and giving that there's north of 140 demons. That's a lot to keep track of. Oh, also, I lied. It's not just for protagonists, but literally all 4 of your other party members too, meaning 20 options you can throw out to talk to these demons at literally any point. And for repeat playthroughs with different party members, you have to keep all of their stuff in mind. Fortunately, the Persona 1 Wikidot exists just to give you the answer. I'm a dumb little baby boy sometimes. I have a pretty good memory, but I can't do literally all of that. Each response will elicit 1, sometimes 2 of 4 emotional responses: eager, happy, scared, and angry. The best result is a combination of eagerness and happiness, as it'll land you both a spell card and an item, but more often than not, you'll be aiming for pure eagerness to get the spell card. Another thing to keep in mind is that to get these spell cards, your average party level needs to be at least equal to the demon you're trying to talk to, making it that much more imperative to get anyone lagging behind caught up. The spell cards, again confusingly enough because of the name, is what you'll use to fuse new personas. You'll really want to nail these conversations to avoid getting stuck with Gusty McBlowhard the entire game. Yeah, sorry, I'll only hold your hand for gameplay once more. Now your starting persona is not one you can really carry throughout the game, like pretty much every other starting persona in the series, so you'll want to flip to another one eventually, once the damage starts dropping off. But, okay, we know what response we want, we have a guide, we should just be able to get what we want in these conversations, right? Right? Oh, honey, no, why would it ever be that easy, right? A holdover from the SMT series actually affects the sides of conversation here. The moon phases. Changing every 16 steps while in the dungeon, as moons are known to do. The 2 main phases to pay attention to are the new moon and the full moon. If you're close to the new moon, get those conversations rolling. The demons will be less irritable and you'll be more likely to get your way. If the opposite is true and the full moon is upon you, honestly just start whipping out persona attacks or unloading ammo or whatever you'd like to do instead of converse, because they're less likely to watch Mark dance crazy than Katy Perry is likely to come back after having 2 major flop errors at this point. And Mark has an awesome little crazy dance, so you know the times are bad. Just Keep the moon in mind, have that wiki dot in your hand like a man hiding his past holds of a Bible, and take your cards straight into the Velvet Room located within the malls and dungeons. Truth be told, I was challenging myself a little bit as to how long I could go without mentioning the Velvet Room in this section of a script. And getting to page 33 of a script? Not bad work at all. Once you have a good collection of spell cards, you're going to want to stop by Igor's suave little jazz club known as the Velvet Room. Drinks are flowing, Nameless is laying it down hard on those keys, Belladonna is letting out the most graceful tune you've ever heard since Tell Me That You Love Me from Victorious, and Igor has his hand stretched out ready to take you to your table. Much like the contact system, the Velvet Room can also get pretty hectic, but unlike the contact system, I don't feel confident that I'll do a good enough job getting down to the nitty-gritty, so instead, I'm just going to keep this as simple as possible. That's a 12 by 12 chart of symbols. Good job lying to yourself, bucko. Okay, so, unlike the modern Persona games, Persona 1 as well as both Persona 2s only let you fuse 2 demons at a time. As a result, no crazy combinations are needed to summon the super strong persona that you want, and as such you could rely on fusion calculators pretty reliably. I usually go to the GitHub sites for any of these games. The link for Persona 1's will be in the description, but seriously, super helpful. The site also lists affinities, what types of spells can be inherited, and gemstones? Yes, so there's a number of gemstones that you can collect during your adventure, and for the longest time I had no idea how the hell these things played any sort of role, but in researching, now I do. Video research is fun like that, you know? So, the simple formula for the fusion is adding the 2 demon levels together, divide by 2, and add 3. You would then go to the next persona in the matching arcana to get your result. Gemstones would let you roll an additional 1 to 2 personas forward or back, depending on what you're making and the gemstone you're tossing in. Almost all of these will be in the fusion generator, but some will need help with via the wikidot. Let's go back to those 2 personas I recommended earlier from Mark and Najo, Shauki and Bennu. Shauki is actually pretty simple to pick up, with the easiest fusion recipe being Ihika and Knocker. Knocker, a level 4 demon, can be scooped up in the first dungeon of the game pretty easily by bragging to it with Mark, whereas Ihika, a level 8 demon, can be picked up after that dungeon is completed around town by making Mark dance crazy. Bada bing, bada boom, you now have a level 17 buffer ready for Najo once he gets up to that level. Bennu, on the other hand, is a pretty good example of needing the gemstones, as nothing naturally fuses into the level 10 Bird of the Sun arcana. Instead, we'll need to make something stronger, then use one of the gemstones that moves downward to create this effect. If I'm understanding this right, the easiest way to go would be through Vidofnir, a level 24 Sun persona. First, we'll need the level 7 demon Nacht Kobold from around Mikagecho, as well as a Funk, a level 9 demon from the police station. Both can be picked up with some payola or condescending from Najo. These 2 together would normally create Vidofnir, but we obviously don't want Vidofnir. It's too high a level. We're aiming for one of the following gemstones: Ruby, Opal, Aquamarine, Moonstone, and Onyx. Gemstones are very rarely found in chests, so our best bet would be to use demon negotiations. When you make a demon eager, you can either ask for an item or a spell card. However, if you make the demon both eager and happy at the same time, you are given an item or EXP on top of a spell card, and, more importantly, your odds of gaining a gemstone increase pretty significantly. While I don't have an exact one-to-one as to what demons give which gemstones, and instead theorize that the gemstones are granted from a pool based on level, in my testing all 3 of the Aquamarine, Moonstone, and Onyx aren't that bad to get early on. Once you do get your gemstone, shuffle on over to the Velvet Room and make yourself Mark's best bet at not being a flop. Now, outside of the gemstones, there's also totem items. Totems will basically overwrite whatever you're creating to give the persona that's tied to the totem. This is how you'd create the ultimate personas, as well as some other fun ones along the way, like Hell, thanks to being stocked in the casino. Also in the casino, tablets. If you amass enough coins and add the tablet into the fusion you're creating, your persona will be able to gain the skill from that tablet. Some of these tablets can also be earned by returning personas back to Igor once they've reached rank 8, just in case you need some light or medium damaging spells while waiting to get enough coins for the big ones. Toss in some weapons and armor too, why not? If you do, they can increase the stats of what you're making, so if you just need a little more oomph, toss the sword you stopped using 2 dungeons ago in there and it'll help. That pesky chart from earlier will also influence stat growth a fair bit here in 2 ways. First, the color. White won't cause an effect, while blue will raise the highest stat of a persona by 5 as well as grant 20 to magical defense. Pretty useful! Red, on the other hand, will lead to fusion accidents more often than not. There's some RNG manipulation stuff involving steps around the mall that you can do that I won't get into here, but it is worth noting that fusion accidents are the only way to create personas of a full arcana. All 3 options of the full arcana are pretty gnarly with a quad resist to every element, so something to keep in mind. Outside of color, we also have the symbols. A circle will allow for a stable fusion, while an X means that fusion cannot happen. An arrow pointing to the right will prioritize the first demon when it comes to skill inheritance. The up and down arrows both prioritize the second demon, with the up arrows increasing stats by 1, whilst the down arrows will decrease all stats by 1. I don't think diagonal arrows are different from pure up and down, but I could be incorrect on this. Fusion in general is all about experimentation though, so don't stress too hard, use your resources, and come up with a solution that'll fit you best at the current moment. I know that was all a lot to digest, so let's just take a moment, relax, and watch Mark dance crazy. Look at him go. We went through so many different aspects of mechanics, but I feel like by doing so, a big barrier to entry has been completely shattered. Speaking for myself, I know I wonder pretty heavily about games I've heard about but never played, which ends up leading to me creating my own ideas of how gameplay even looks and drawing my own conclusions before I so much as press the start button. It's always important to give something you're interested in a shot, lest you may just end up repeating the same arguments made by people from decades past without forming your own conclusion. Now that we've tackled the mechanics and the story elements, the main question that remains is, which of the 2 versions should you play? The footage I've been showing off for the most part has been from the PS1 game, but there is also a PSP port that was released almost 13 years ago in 2009. The conversation is mainly a matter of aesthetics versus gameplay, so let's start with the most obvious things and work our way down from there. Before we can jump into the PSP though, we need to look at our 2 PS1 versions. When I began describing the SEBEC route, the very first thing I mentioned was that I'll be calling every character their Japanese name. That's because the localizers, of which there were 6, working on the PS1 version's release, which probably explains some of the grammatical errors seen throughout the game, decided that a more American setting would be more familiar to the American audience and thus easier to sell. Despite that not being a concern with literally every other JRPG, but sure! Whatever floats for 1996 boats, right? Some of my favorite name changes just for how silly they are would probably be Nate Trinity for Nanjo, just due to the fact that he's the only required character with a divine last name. Chunky for Toro because they literally just could not come up with anything else, could they? Old Yosuke, Yamaoka, and Old Chisato become Bruce, Alfred, and Selena respectively, all having a sort of Arkham vibe. Katsue Kaneda as Mrs. Newrich because that's literally her whole character arc between the ideal and real world, with a name giving some nice Ace Attorney vibes. And of course, the game's main antagonist, Takahisa Kandori, being renamed to Guido Sardinia. Because nothing says scary conqueror of worlds more than a generic as hell Italian name and a sillier one at that. Truly, we are living in the greatest timeline. On top of this though, at least for the party, some skin tones and hair colors were also changed. This was mostly in the case of making a couple characters blonde, although I don't really know why we need to bother with Nanjo's black hair, and some characters were made way too pale for some reason. The biggest change, of course, is in the way of Mark. There's been a few black characters throughout the series, usually NPCs, but they all started black. Possibly most notably Funky Student in Persona 4. Unlike all the other changes though, I kind of vibe with this one. More representation is good, and while the black population isn't exactly large in Japan, having that additional contrast to a stuck-up business type in Nanjo actually works for their feud, so I'll give them credit on that one. Credit that's immediately removed once we look at that skin tone poem again from early on in the game, and the jail cell scene again. But it was a credit that they earned in the first place, right? Back to the name changes. For the most part, Personas and Demons also got a bit of a rework. If I had to guess, it's to help the player understand what each demon or persona is supposed to do. But by doing so, almost all mythological meaning to the persona is completely shattered. Easy example, Gusty McBlowhard aka Seimin Kongu. In Revelations persona, he's named Sterion. Most that I have is that it was a rare car from the 80s, but just like naming Seimin Kongu Gusty McBlowhard, it just ends up becoming some figure. Just a few more examples via the rest of the party's starting personas. Aizen Miyou becomes Voodoo, Ogun flips to the name Shaman, Maso changes to Nemheim becomes Talon, Hori is now Fury, and Bray becomes Goonie. Ellie's Nike is the only one to keep its actual name. Just another point on the board for why she's the best character in the game, if anything. Am I right?
Names aside though, let's touch on the combat changes really quickly for the US PS1 version. While the changes aren't numerous, the biggest things are a 1-2 combo. Enemy encounter rate is reduced to about a third of its normal in the original version, and more experience points are gained per battle to compromise. If you do the same number of battles between each PS1 version of Persona 1, your American team will end up being a fair bit higher leveled as a result. Since we are in America now, even with the shrine Maki's mom is collapsed in, of course we're going to be using dollars now instead of yen. How the team went about this is basically taking the amounts the demon or boss would normally hand out, divided by 100, and rounding up to the next yen amount if need be. While this lets you get more bank off of the early encounters, in practice you're going to end up being far behind the curve money-wise if you're wanting to purchase items or coins for the casino. After all, you're only doing a third of the battles, so you're only going to get about a third of the paycheck. Grinding ends up becoming a necessity for cash in this case, but then you end up over-leveled if you do so. The idea was there, but things were just not executed properly. Also, just really quick note, it's a no-brainer with modern tech, but the battle speed was greatly increased with an option for fast-forwarding further via a rush command in the PSP version. That's always going to be a good thing for any re-release. When it came to the PSP version, Persona 1 plays a lot closer to the Japanese version both visually and mechanically. The names and character designs are back to how they were in the Japanese version, so RAP Black Mark, with the encounter rate and money pickups being similar to that version's mechanisms as well. If anything, the largest change here between the PS1 and PSP would be in visuals and music. The best way I can describe the visuals of the PS1 version is that it's gritty. Your menus are metallic, all the sound effects have a certain crunch to it with different sounds depending on what you're doing in the menu and where, and there's this esoteric type feel where you don't know what situation you'll have to fight your way out of next. Accompanying all of this is a wide selection of songs, between dungeon themes, shop themes, my 6-hour playlist consisting of just the casino song as I play the slots, character themes, and of course, the battle music. The battle music in particular has a sort of rocky aesthetic versus the rest of the game, which goes for this spooky, unsettling feeling half the time. And craft store radio music for the other half. Honestly, just an awesome OST that I would recommend giving a listen when you have the time. There's so many good tracks on there, especially some of the arranged works. Jumping over to the PSP version though, and you guys know how companies like to take their fun and quirky logos just to homogenize and sterilize them, right? Persona 1 was a very early adapter of this practice. A trendsetter, through and through.
It's not that I mind a simplistic look for a menu. For instance, I kind of like how Pokemon X and Y's menus look, even though I know I'm in the vast minority there. But to go from something so stylized and so fitting of its surroundings to something so plain just genuinely hurts. Sure, some things make more sense, like the pause menu being an actual menu instead of a solar system type view, but that otherworldliness really helps in a game where you're jumping between multiple realities. And then, as far as music goes, the OST got slimmed down from the PSP version, so some song placements in-game get flipped around or changed. There's a few new songs, most of which I'd label as kinda good outside of School Days, which is an all-time track, make no mistake about it. When it comes to removed songs, though, the biggest loser in this regard are the character themes, almost all of which have been scrapped, whereas some are just blatantly misused. If you're playing Persona 1 PSP, you're going to hear Maki's theme a lot, but with Aki and Mai, for example, characters that are meant to be polar opposite, their songs are switched in certain places, which is just odd. Incredibly odd. The character symbolism was basically thrown aside in favor of vibes, which defeats the purpose of naming a song Maki if it gets thrown around literally anywhere. Because the style is so dramatically different, the question does often come up as to which version is truly better. Like, sure, the PSP version is more updated to modern sensibilities, but the PS1 has those otherworldly vibes and those sick beats, you know? If we're talking without mods at all, I'd honestly say give both a shot, but if mods are on the table, do the PSP version with a PS1 OST patch, so the music plays exactly where it should. The either or aspect here should not be an inhibitor to entry. You can't necessarily go wrong in either direction, they're both just different, you know? Above all else, the one thing I hope I was able to achieve with this behemoth of a video is demystifying Persona 1. I said it early on, but I feel like as a gaming populace and just really people in general, we will often hear about a game or a piece of media and just start imagining as to what it's really like down to the tiniest details. From there, we begin forming our own conclusions as to what the actual product is like without so much as touching the actual product. I've been on the internet for far, far longer than I care to admit at this point, but this sentiment can be seen time and time again, most typically in people recommending games that the other person should definitely enjoy based on what the recommender knows, but aren't ever touched because it's just not something the recommendee is familiar with. In a way, that sentiment reflects on the game's themes as well. If you don't take chances and let yourself go through some bad times, you're never going to grow. Sure, everything seems hunky-dory, but that happiness simply won't last forever. It'll grow stagnant. It's just a matter of if you want to step out of what you know and embrace anything new that may come your way. We may have our ideal reality of what we'd like our world to look like, but that reality is fleeting, with the tides changing around us. It's up to us as to whether or not we choose to adapt. I'd like to thank everyone for watching, especially if you got all the way to this point. I originally just had the idea of a figure skating performance in mind and wanted to tie it all to something, and eventually realized I had more thoughts than I thought I ever did on Persona 1, so I wanted to craft this whole thing. I'd be more than happy to talk about the other Persona games in the future. It's just a little hard given I'm currently working 60-hour work weeks, so any video of mine I'm kinda squeezing out between shifts. I'd also like to take a quick moment to thank both Anthony Chain and Reality Resort via Casey for their contributions to this video. Their links will be in the description. Special thanks goes to my crew as well, Ian Igus, Gilgo, Birdie, and History Doggo. You guys helped elevate this thing to heights I never would have hit alone. If you guys liked what you saw, please please give a video a like and subscribe to see more. Feel free to leave any questions in the comments as well, or just any feedback. I'd love to grow and touch on anything that I couldn't hear to the best of my knowledge. My main bread and butter is what I call the ultimate playlists. And as of writing this, I do have a couple different ones in mind, including a Volume 4 for Persona, so stay tuned for that. Also, consider joining the Patreon. I'm not the best at keeping it up admittedly, but any financial support would go a long way. Finally, I do have a Discord as well, where you can see more up-to-the-minute updates and talk with people from all sorts of different fandoms. For now, my name has been Joey Pals. I'll be sending you guys off with one more performance by Anthony Chain. What a nice little bow on things. Again, thank you for watching, take care, and be your true mind.
I hear a voice to cause me a look at the floor. So let's all let me
And take your hands up with well work entirely. Isn't it?